I finally got the time to write out this story, and I wanted to share it with you. This happened back in 2015, and I still have no answers. I moved into a small house for rent in Indiana. It was my first place on my own, so I was pretty proud of it. My last place was with a roommate, which ended fine, but since she got engaged and was planning on moving in with her fiancé, we weren't going to be renewing our lease. I was happy for her, and it gave me some time to save up for my own place too, so it worked out. My landlord was an older couple who was moving out of state. The house used to be their summer home, but they decided they didn't want to keep moving around anymore, putting their son in charge of maintenance. They were all good people, and I really think I lucked out on them and the house because they took pretty good care of the place. I even met some of the neighbors pretty quickly. There was a couple who had a newborn to my left, an older couple across from me, and an older lady that lived to my right. Her name was Janet, and this story is about her. Janet was pleasant enough when I first met her. She introduced herself quickly, explained that she lived alone, other than her 2 cats, and that her son came over to check on her weekly and take her to run any errands she had as she didn't drive. I thought it was cute that she immediately gave me a rundown on her every day, just in case I saw a middle-aged man come over and get suspicious. She was a sweet lady, and I did enjoy talking to her when we were both outside. Several months into me living there, I even gave her my phone number in case she needed anything. I had met her son, and he explained that she does have a bit of Alzheimer's, so I felt better about her having a quick person to reach out to in case of any emergencies. I had helped her with replacing a light bulb, grabbed some extra bread at the store, and even brought her some treats for her cats before. So, it was becoming a pretty normal occurrence for me to see Janet. What I was not expecting was to start getting these weird and eventually cryptic calls from her. It started out seemingly as a mistake. She called, I had her number saved in my phone, and after saying hello, I heard Janet's familiar voice say, "Hi! Oh, I meant to call my sister Martha. I'm sorry." And then she'd hang up. No big deal. She was older, it was a simple mistake. About an hour or so later, she would call back and it would be the same thing. "Is this Martha?" I would reply, "No, Janet, it's me, Lynn, your neighbor." "Oh, I'm sorry, dear, I was trying to call Martha." She called me 4 times that day. All the same thing. I have a lot of patience for things like that. Having a grandma that was close to her age that I adored, so it was like having a second grandma that I was watching over in a way. I ended up seeing her the next day when she was outside sweeping off her patio, so I wanted to ask her about the calls and make sure that she was okay. She laughed as she shook her head and told me that she just kept mixing up our numbers and would try to be careful to not bother me. I told her it wasn't a bother at all, but then later that evening, the same thing happened. She called me twice, asking for Martha. The next day, I asked her about Martha, wondering if our numbers were close, maybe a number off or maybe even transposed. She explained that that was probably the case and that she probably needed to rewrite the number, claiming that she most likely just couldn't read her own handwriting anymore. I even offered to program the numbers in her phone, but she declined, explaining how she had a landline and an old flip phone. She said she didn't even want the cell phone, but her son made her carry it around on her person in case anything happened to her, like a fall, and she couldn't get to her landline. She said that she didn't like going through the phone because it was hard to read, so she just had these large cards on her wall with everyone's number on them. I left it alone and just decided that if I have to deal with a few wrong calls from Janet, then so be it. No problem. And the calls continued, as if on a schedule. She would try calling for Martha, I would tell her it was the wrong number, but then, after this went on for a few nights, I decided to amuse myself. When she asked for Martha, I responded, confirming I was Martha. Janet remained quiet for a moment, and I was worried that maybe she knew I was lying. Surely she would know her own sister's voice, and I guess I was kind of being mean, right? But it wasn't intentional. I was just about to hang up when Janet finally spoke, and I regretted ever saying that I was Martha. Janet first went on to talk about how thankful she was that she finally got a hold of me. And she first launched into how she was doing. How she went to the doctor because her knee had been acting up, and she didn't feel like getting knee surgery was worth it at her age. She told me how she had to take one of her cats to the vet because he was sneezing a lot, but he was doing fine now. She even mentioned one of the neighbors, one I wasn't quite familiar with, but said that she saw him at the grocery store and that he was looking good, but was buying way too many canned vegetables. I thought it was funny and cute, listening to her as I made dinner, thinking I hope I was the same whenever I got older. I was thinking maybe she just needed someone to talk to about everything going on at home that wasn't her son. But all the light and funny business came to a halt when her tone shifted. She said, "Martha, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I responded with, "Okay." And she said, "Do you ever think about that day? You know the one I'm talking about. Back when we were 12, behind the old Miller property." I stayed quiet, not sure how to respond. I thought maybe this could have been her testing me, and seeing if I really was Martha. I thought the jig was up. I started speaking, but she stopped me to continue on. She mentioned how she kept having dreams about her. "Ingrid keeps talking to me in these dreams. She says she forgives us, but it's starting to scare me, Martha." She mentioned how they never found her and that it was their fault. She said the sounds of Ingrid falling way down there and the crush, it makes her wake up at night and it makes her sick. Janet's voice dropped really low, and I had to pick up my phone to hear her better. It sounded like she was starting to cry. "She was only 8, Martha. We should have done something, and now it's all coming back. What if she's still down there?" Then, she mentioned that she thought about telling the police to give her family closure, but she didn't know if it was worth it because her parents were long gone. She sat quietly for a moment asking what I thought, and I didn't know how to respond. Did Janet just confess to something dark? Something she did with Martha? I didn't know how to respond to it, and I felt awful that I may have taken advantage of her in such a vulnerable time, so I just hung up. My heart was now racing, and I remember trying to finish dinner and kept looking at my phone, waiting to see if she would call back. She never did. About an hour or so, I finally called my friend and told her what I just heard. We both started brainstorming for a bit, thinking that it sounded like I had just heard a confession about something she may have done. Her and her sister. My friend wanted to try and look for something online, but we had no idea where to start. I didn't know Janet's birthday. I didn't even know her exact age, so I couldn't possibly narrow down a year. All we knew was that there was possibly a missing kid named Ingrid. We came up empty-handed, and my friend pushed me to try and get more information, but I didn't feel right doing that. This was very serious if it was true, but manipulating an older woman who may have Alzheimer's was just as wrong to me. Besides, I didn't even know how I would go about bringing it up, so I never did. She called me a few more times after that night, but every time I denied being Martha so she would hang up. A few days later, I saw Janet's son helping her back inside. I wanted to check on them, as I hadn't seen Janet leave her house. Her son, James, looked exhausted, but said she was doing all right, but had been having trouble sleeping lately. He said that she was getting more and more confused about time and people, and even mentioned how she was talking to his wife like she was her sister Martha. This caught my attention, so I asked him about Martha. He said that Martha was her twin sister, but that she died from cancer almost 20 years ago. He asked if she was being a bother to me, and he just looked so concerned. I told him no, and that I was even willing to help anywhere that I could. I gave him my number in case he needed me to check in on her too, and he thanked me, saying that I've become quite the loyal neighbor. That was it for our conversation. He confirmed that she was a little more irritable than normal and having trouble sleeping. Was this related to her call with me? Was it all true? And with the way James looked and how much he seemed relieved with my help, I didn't feel right bringing it up either. And that's where it all stopped. I got a few more calls, but she never said anything, and I never said that I was Martha again. She would apologize for calling, and then it would end. James never said anything to me, and I never brought it up. I tried with what information I had to find anything that might confirm if what she said was real. I guessed Janet was in her 70s, maybe early 80s. I tried looking for girls named Ingrid that went missing in Indiana around the time that she would have been 12, based on my map. I even tried looking for girls that may have been found, like remains. But so far, I've come up empty-handed. I unfortunately don't know if it even happened in Indiana. And if so, where for that matter. I would even think that having a first name and age would have helped, but no dice. Now I'm just left wondering if what I heard was true. She had Alzheimer's. James eventually told me how she had early-stage dementia too, so was it possible it was just something she made up? Or something on her mind? 10 years later, I still have no answers. James ended up moving Jana into a care facility. He let me know after she had an accident, and I felt bad that it was one of the days I wasn't home, but what chilled me is what he told me, and I don't think he realized it. He said that when he went to get her, she had called him, and she seemed delirious. She kept talking to Martha, saying that, "I'm sorry, Ingrid," and he didn't know who Ingrid was. So, there's no way she was just doing that to mess with me. But now I wonder if it was all a true story. Did this sweet little Janet do something to another kid when she was 12? I don't think that I'll ever find out. Nor do I want to know. This happened back when I was very young, so some of this is what I remember, but there's a lot of info in this that I got from my parents when I was older. So I apologize in advance if I'm missing some details in between. Back in the early 90s, my sister and I had a babysitter that watched us for several years. I'll call her Sadie, and I remember her as being a very sweet and fun girl. She was 18 or close to that age the last time that I saw her. I don't even remember how my parents found her. Both of my parents worked. My dad owned an auto shop and my mom was a nurse. I didn't remember this, but my parents told me that Sadie used to watch me when I was younger. Then she would be there when I got home from preschool. When my mom had my sister Isabel, she, of course, was home for a while and got me off to school and greeted me at home. Sadie still watched us during the holiday breaks, or on those random nights that my parents went out. Once my sister was old enough to be left with a babysitter and Mom's maternity leave ran out, Sadie would then start watching us again when I got home from school. I didn't mind either. Like I said, she was a great person, and it was almost like having an older sister around. She always played with us and was just a genuinely good person to spend time with. And of course, my parents loved her too. Her parents had come over before. Sometimes they dropped her off and picked her up, but for the most part, she drove herself. That was until her car broke down. But without hesitation, my parents offered to let her borrow our family van so that she could still watch us. That's how much they trusted her. They basically handed over a $20,000 vehicle at the time to a teenager because they knew she needed it. And, to be honest, if she didn't have a reliable way to get to our place, one of our parents would have to stay home with us, which wasn't really an option. She had it when she was watching us, that way she had a vehicle in case of emergencies, which did come in handy when she watched us that summer. Which meant that Sadie was at our house more often. Now, Sadie also had a boyfriend that I'll call Sam. Sam seemed like a good guy. He was, I think, a year or two older than Sadie, because I remember someone saying how he wasn't in school anymore. He was always nice to us too and played with us when he came over, and my parents knew he was there too. Sadie was a very responsible girl and she never did anything questionable when he was over. I think I saw them holding hands once or twice, but that was about it. He would swing by sometimes and hang out for a while and then leave. One time, he even brought us some ice cream from McDonald's. Sometimes he would be there the entire time, and my mom would come home first, typically, and then talk to both of them, treating them the same, so I knew that he was just as welcome in our home. But things started to go wrong. It was one day that she was watching us when she had my mom's van. She'd had it for about a week or two at that point, and she was telling my mom that Sam was going to help her get the part that weekend to fix it. My mom even told me how she offered to have my dad look at it since he did have a shop, but Sadie declined, not wanting to be a burden on them. I know my mom hates herself for that too, for not pushing the matter or insisting, but she assumed that it was just because she was becoming an adult and she wanted to take care of things on her own, to prove herself and to others that she was independent. Once Mom left, the day went as normal. We played, watched TV, and did whatever we did at that time. While we were having lunch, Sadie went into the living room and was talking on our phone. The conversation started to sound a bit heated. I remember her saying something along the lines of, "You're supposed to have it fixed by now," and how she had to give the van back. When she returned to the kitchen, I asked her if something was wrong, and she was back to her normal, happy self, saying that everything was fine. We finished up our day without me thinking about it any further. When my mom got home that evening, I was in the room when Sadie explained that her car should be fixed that night, so she would bring the van back tomorrow, and my mom was okay with this, and they continued talking. My dad had been taking her to work while Sadie had the van, but my mom had a later shift that next day due to some kind of training thing, so she was going to have to drive herself. The next morning is where things went wrong. I got up when I normally do, had my breakfast, and when I went to the living room to watch cartoons, that's when I noticed Sadie wasn't there yet. Usually she was there when I finished breakfast. I asked my mom if she was coming, and I remember my mom sounding a little stressed. She confirmed yes, but said that it appeared that she was running late. I thought nothing else and just continued watching TV. Shortly after, my mom sat Isabel next to me, asking me to keep an eye on her as she finished getting ready for work. Again, Sadie was usually around, sitting with us while my mom did that, so it was odd. By 9 a.m., an hour after Sadie should have been there, and no word from her mom, my mom began to get worried. I remember her calling someone, it was Sadie's parents, and asking about her. Then my mom also called my dad. I remember her saying his name and talking about what to do because if she didn't show up, she would have to miss work. Then, a little after 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. My mom quickly opened it, all of us expecting Sadie, but instead it was Sam. He smiled, but he looked a little nervous, and my mom asked him what he was doing there. He said that Sadie and him had made plans to meet at our place that morning so he could drive her home since she was returning the van. His explanation made sense, but then he was also confused as to why she wasn't there. My mom asked if he knew where she was, and he said that he last saw her the night prior to and had no idea. My mom went to her bedroom taking the cordless phone while Sam stayed in the living room with us. He was playing with Isabel and one of her dolls, and then would talk to me about what I was watching and doing, just like he would any other day. Other than Sadie seemingly missing in action, everything else seemed pretty normal to me. An hour had almost passed when my mom told Sam that he should probably head home, and that she would let him know or tell Sadie to contact him if they got a hold of her or heard from her. And he agreed, gave us both a high five, and left. When he talked to my mom, he did have a look of concern, too. Like, he felt that something was wrong. My mom ended up staying home with us that day, but there were a lot of calls coming in and going out as well. Something I didn't really understand at the time. It only added to my confusion and my concern when my dad came home, and my parents continued talking in hushed tones, not really saying much in front of us. The next few days became pretty chaotic, and not our normal schedule. There were several more calls, and we had a few visitors. There was a man and a woman that came by the next day. They kind of looked like cops. They had on similar uniforms, but not exactly. Later that night, there was a couple that came over, and I remember the woman had been crying, and she hugged my mom, and then my mom started crying too. They asked me to go play in my room as they all sat in the living room talking. The day after, my dad stayed home with us, and my mom was gone most of the day, but she wasn't dressed like she was going to work. My mom then stayed home with us for 2 more days, again, taking a lot of calls, and then after that, my aunt was watching us pretty regularly. I like my aunt. She was never mean to us or anything, but as a young child, I was still curious as to what happened to Sadie. Where was she? And why was she not watching us anymore? My little self honestly thought it had something to do with the van since we still didn't have it back. Eventually, we did get the van back, but I think it was about a week later. But it was strange because after needing it back so badly, they got rid of it and got a new one. My aunt continued to watch us throughout the rest of that summer, and after I went back to school, we got a new babysitter. She was nice too. She played with us, but she never got as goofy as Sadie would. Really, I just wanted Sadie back. But when I brought it up to my mom, I remember the sadness in her face, making me immediately think that I said something wrong. But she smiled and just said that Sadie was grown up now and had to do a better job. I left it at that and just never really brought it up again. Until I got older, that is. When I was in high school, the 4 of us were having dinner, and I was asked to watch my sister because they were going to be home late. I'd been watching my sister for some time now, no more need for a babysitter, but I made a joke about getting paid for it. Then I kind of randomly just decided to ask about Sadie. I made a comment about her age and wondered if she still lived nearby, and my parents got quiet. Now that I was older, I understood that look. They were hiding something. I asked what exactly happened with her, and I would have never have guessed the truth. The day that Sadie watched us and had been arguing on the phone, she'd been arguing with her boyfriend at the time, Sam. Sam was supposed to be working and fixing her car, but had supposedly kept putting it off, and she was getting rightfully frustrated. After she left that night, she apparently had an argument with Sam in person, and that's where things went bad. Sam went berserk and attacked her. He had hit her in the head so many times that she was knocked unconscious. Fearing that he had just killed her, he threw her in the back of the van, our van, and dumped her in the woods off the highway. He cleaned up the blood in the van, dropped it off at Sadie's place, and then walked back to his place. He lived about 2 blocks away. The next day, knowing that she was supposed to show up at our place, He came over and pretended that he had no idea what was going on. He held my sister, he played with me. The guy who had just brutally attacked one of the sweetest girls I've ever known. It apparently aided him too, because the next day, he confessed. His parents brought him in, he told them everything, and led to them where he had dumped Sadie. By some crazy miracle, Sadie was still alive, but barely. Her skull was fractured and she had lost a lot of blood. This is why Sadie's parents had showed up at our place, and the other cop-looking people that were there were detectives. They were already suspicious of Sam because he parked the van on the street instead of in the driveway like Sadie always did. Not to mention, they never saw her actually come home. Her bed was never touched, as she always made her bed, but Sam claimed that she hadn't stayed the night with him that night either. They didn't feel like his story was adding up, so they had all showed up at our place to tell my parents that she'd been found, but they had to keep our van as evidence. Once it was all done, my parents clearly didn't want to keep that thing, so they traded it in for a new one. Sam was arrested and charged, and Sadie had a long road to recovery, which is why she never came back. She actually had to learn to walk again, but she did it. She also has problems with her eyesight in her left eye now. But even through all of that, she healed. She went to college, and was actually working at a hospital out of state. She became a nurse, like my mother. I was stunned. It was in our local news, but I never saw any of it, thanks to my parents not wanting us to know when we were still so young. I was horrified, though. All I knew was Sadie was gone, and so was Sam, who I thought was pretty cool, too. My parents did say that they saw Sadie when she was in recovery, and she was happy to see them. After all she went through, her worry was not being there that next morning, making my mom call in. That's the kind of person she was. I still haven't reached out to Sadie after all these years. My sister doesn't remember her as much as I do, but I do want to just ask how she is. I know my parents have said there were no hard feelings toward us, but part of me still feels weird about it. Anyway, I just wanted to share how my babysitter was almost killed, and how her attacker spent a lot of time around us too. Thankfully, the story does have a fairly happy ending, and Sam is still incarcerated. Hey, Raven. I believe your podcast came to me for a reason. I heard stories where people said exactly what I went through in my life, and I strongly believe in quantum immortality, and you actually don't die until you're 100, and in some people that never die in a life, or have extra lives and live to whatever the oldest age was. I actually have 4 stories. I don't know how you put them together, but I'll let you handle that. I'm just here to hear my story from another person's view. So, let me get to it. When I was 9 or 10, I had my first sleep paralysis. I heard my grandma talking to my sister, but I couldn't move. I could just see the area around as I was lying on the floor looking the opposite way from my grandma. When I finally woke up out of it, I asked my grandma where my sister went. My grandma stopped reading her book and looked at me, telling me that my sister was not here. I tell her what just happened to me, and she says that it was the devil, that my mom used to have them all the time and to just wiggle my toes, which I never remembered to do. One day I was sitting with my grandma watching a movie, and she tells me to get up and let the man sit where I'm sitting. I look around and ask her, "What man?" She points to the door, but nobody is there. I'm scared and confused. I just sit there, and about a minute later, she goes back to normal. The next day it happens again. This time, my cousin and older sister are there, and she tells my sister to open the door and let the man in. Then she proceeds to talk to the man and tell him to sit down. My cousin, being the dramatic person she was, and still is, starts crying, saying that she did the same thing some other day, and about a minute later, my grandma goes back to normal like nothing ever happened. On August 25th of 2001, one of my favorite singers died in a plane crash. I cried for months. I cried for her even though 9/11, I ran out of tears, and I cried so much that the last person to pass away around me was one of my mom's best friends, so I wasn't really good with death. Come April 25th, 2002, I lose another one of my favorite rappers, and I couldn't cry for her because I was still cried out from Aaliyah's death. I just couldn't anymore, no matter how hard I tried. I told my grandmother that I couldn't cry anymore, and her words were, "I hope nobody cries for me like that when I die." I tell her, of course we will. And my cousin says, don't say that. You know we will. And hopefully that doesn't happen for a long time. On May 27th, 2002, it was Memorial Day, about 12 p.m. I decide to take a nap at my mom's house at the time, and we all lived in the same neighborhood. I lay on the couch facing the door that comes from the living room into the dining room, and I fall asleep. Of course, I get sleep paralysis. I heard you read a story about this little person, and it gave me chills bad. I was lying there, and the door flies open. I can't move, so I'm just lying there looking at this tiny little thing with a top hat on, looking at me and breathing hard. He runs and jumps on me. I could feel him breathing on me. Then I hear through its breaths, "Go to your grandma." I wake up thinking that somebody is essaying me because it felt so real, but nobody was there. So I get up and go up the hill to my grandma's house, and when I walk in, she's leaning over the couch throwing up black stuff. I asked her if she was okay, which it was obvious she wasn't, but my 13-year-old mind wasn't thinking right, so to my surprise she says no. I asked her, "Do you want me to get my mom?" and she says yes. That's when I knew something was really, really wrong with my grandma. My grandma never wanted help. She never wanted to go to the hospital. And at that time, she was mad at my mom for, I don't know what reason. I do, but it's not my business to tell. I go tell my mom, and my mom and her girlfriend go up there, and I decide to go back. I see my mom crying, and they help my grandma up and take her to the hospital. It's the last time that I saw my grandma alive. Me and my family clean up her house. I cleaned up the vomit. The phone rang and it was my grandma. I don't really remember the conversation. It was pretty short, but I do remember her saying, "I'm going home." Hearing that, I got happy before my oldest cousin snatched the phone out of my hand, like I did something wrong, but I didn't care. I was just happy that my grandma was coming home. It didn't occur to me until years later that she said she was going home, not coming home. On May 28th, 2002, my grandma was gone. Everybody was expecting me to cry the most because I was the youngest, and at the time the closest to her. But I remembered what she said, and I didn't cry because I was all teared out, but because I just felt like that's not what she wanted. But now that I'm older, I cry more than ever about it. May I add that both my sisters had babies before my grandma passed away. They're 23 now, and she got to actually see my oldest nephew, who was born in January. But my older nephew, she saw a glimpse. But it was a cold May, and she said keep him in the house, so she never got to properly see him. What I'm getting to is, we thought my nephew was mute. He made no sounds when he cried, like nothing. We had to watch him 24/7 to make sure he was okay. However, the day my grandma passed away, we heard the loudest cry from him. It was so crazy. My grandma was only 60 when she passed, so I don't know if that was related to her, but it happened. I didn't really believe in reincarnation until one of my nieces was born in 2015. She arrived the same time they were having a funeral for the guy she was named after, and when she was about 1 or 2, she would just stare at me. And when I would notice that, she would smile and be like, "Hey, Jazz." Nobody that she knew called me that. But you know who did call me that? The guy that she was named after. Her name is Mariana. So one day I'm playing with her and I ask her what her name is. She looks me dead in the eyes, gets close to me, and says, "Marcel." I said, "What?" My oldest niece was shocked and just like me and said, "WTF?" I was so shocked that I couldn't even tell her to watch her mouth. She had never heard anybody say that name, and when she said it again. And she looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something. We were all shocked, and she was just laughing. But yeah, that's my first weirdest experience. I don't know what this would be put under, but thank you for reading. And I still have more to come. The Lizard Man of Lee County. This particular cryptid is interesting for quite a few reasons. While the concept of reptilian creatures presenting some kind of threat to humanity dates as far back as the Epic of Gilgamesh, there was never really a cryptid type of creature that embodied such a reptilian danger. That is, until the late 1980s, when in Lee County, South Carolina, newspapers lit up with stories about a so-called lizard man attacking a young local, Christopher Davis, who was changing flat tires on his drive home from work. The phenomena began in July of 1988 when Lee County sheriffs responded to reports of a vehicle being damaged. The car itself had teeth and claw marks, where the creature had ended up climbing atop the car as Christopher tried to flee. By the time the story hit the papers, people were incredibly riled up over the whole thing as other stories of the lizard man began to spread like a wildfire through the community. It wasn't long before the story had made national attention, as over 100 newspapers across the country ran the story about the lizard man of Lee County. This is truly an instance of a story going viral at a time when there was no real social platform on which they could go viral. First, it was the tourists that came, then the, quote, hunters, and finally it was the media that arrived. The resulting tourism boom became its own kind of phenomenon as people began to sell Lizard Man t-shirts, and then other merch began being peddled. Everyone wanted to come and have their own encounter with the so-called Lizard Man. And one might be forgiven for questioning the sanity of anyone desiring to have their own face-to-face encounter with this lizard man, as the creature itself is described to be at least 7 feet tall, with snake-like scales, long clawed fingers, and seemingly glowing red eyes. Those clawed fingers are definitely to be considered deadly, as evidenced by the visible damage that was left on Christopher Davis's vehicle after his encounter with the monster. Even today, nearly 40 years later, the legend of the Lizard Man is alive and well in Bishopville, South Carolina. They even have an entire festival around the cryptid, and truly do celebrate their own personal town monster. If anything, the cryptid has been as much a socio-economic phenomenon as much as a cultural one, as this town has truly taken control of its cryptid and turned it into something to celebrate instead of something to fear and loathe. Unlike other cryptids in other places in Appalachia, where the very legend itself has accrued a morbidly high body count. In short, I think that Lee County has found a way to take something that could ordinarily become this dark kind of stigma around a place, embraced it, and turned it into something that has truly benefited their community. Much like Hell, Michigan, the community has leaned into it, and arguably come out the better for what could have been some very bad press for the entire area. If cryptid hunting is something you're interested in, then the Lizard Man of Lee County might be the safest place in the world to begin your hunt. Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're having a great summer. This is just a strange story, and I have no idea how to classify it, other than a scary house story, maybe. Some family visited over the 4th of July weekend. We had a barbecue, caught up with some friends, and even got their help tackling some minor projects around the house. And then before we knew it, it was time for everyone to go home. But the next day, when we were putting all of our patriotic decor away, we found something unexpected. Let me give you some background about our house. It's a 2-story with an unfinished basement. No attic above us, just an A-frame ceiling with a crawl space that kind of encircles the upstairs. But the basement houses our laundry room, a treadmill, some weights, old furniture we no longer use, a deep freezer, and the hot water heater and furnace. The basement is also our refuge during the frequent tornado warnings and severe thunderstorms that unfortunately hit us every year. We also have a room off to the side that goes completely beneath the house. And this area is where all of our 4th of July, Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthday, and Halloween decor is stored until it's needed. But with my current health issues, I'm not going down there. Too much to trip over. But on this particular day, I had to make an exception. After I placed everything back in its box, my mom and stepdad headed downstairs to put it away. I thought nothing of it as I finished my last cup of coffee for the day. That was until I heard my mom shout, "What the hell?" I heard them talking about a new room, so I walked down there to find out what was going on. As it turned out, they accidentally knocked over another box in that little room, and when it hit the wall, or what they thought was a wall, it caved in, revealing a room that we had no idea existed. My mom started freaking out and wondering why no one had told us about this. My stepdad just told her to calm down and to just check everything out. By then, I was right behind her. She kept telling me to go back upstairs, that this was dangerous, but I just had to know what was in that room. My stepdad tried to turn on the light, but it only cut on to a horrible screaming sound. Luckily, my mom had a flashlight with her. We slowly made our way inside, and no, there were no dead bodies. No signs that anyone was there against their will, and no chains hanging from the ceiling, other than the ones for that screwed-up light, and a ceiling fan which sounded even worse when we tried to turn it on. I held on to my white cane for dear life as I moved around the surprisingly big space. Again, nothing remarkable at first, just a small daybed, folding chair, a ceramic utility sink which still worked but just needed to be cleaned, a microwave, and an old-fashioned toaster oven combo that took up the entire shelf above the sink. 2 tables were on each side of the bed, one with an alarm clock and the other with a large old-fashioned TV with a VCR on the floor. My mom found a coffee pot beneath the sink, along with a half-eaten bag of chips. My dad found a large stash of movies from the 90s. Everything from Titanic to While You're Sleeping, It Takes Two, When Harry Met Sally, and then came the gross stuff. Beneath the normal movies, he found a stack of, dirty magazines, adult films, and some used contraceptives. For whatever reason, my mom flipped back the covers on the bed to find an old Atlanta Braves t-shirt, a pair of plain black shorts, and a letter which was barely visible. It read, "Hello to whoever finds this place. I'm sorry you're finding this room, and I'm sorry for the mess. The light has never worked. and the fan has just started to break down. Miss K let me stay here against her sister's wishes. I'm just a man who effed up my life, but I'm trying to get back on my feet. I've saved enough money for a real apartment. Miss K is very happy. Her sister still can't look me in the eye, and I guess I understand. I did a lot of bad things to people. If you're reading this, it means I'm long gone. I'm free at last. I left it all here for a reason. Miss K said she would seal the room up, but if you're standing here at my old bed, it means that she didn't. And now it's your mess to clean up. I don't mean to be disrespectful to you, but you have to clean this up. It's much easier than you think to get in your house. That outlet in the carport that doesn't work, it's not an outlet. And that weird circular hole to the left of your bushes has nothing to do with the chimney. Those are both major access points to this room. But whenever I had a girl over, I just used the door leading out to the backyard. So please, seal all this up for your safety. And that chain on your door leading to the upstairs, very breakable. Miss K's sister found that out the hard way when she told me I was a felon who needed to be put down, and she found me in bed beside her. And she never talked ugly to me again. Anyway, hope you enjoy the house. Don't forget what I said. Oh, and don't let your son turn into a convict like me. Not only did she read it, she took a picture of it and sent us all a copy. And this, y'all, was the exact note. Without another word, my stepdad scooped me up, cane and all, and we tore out of that room. Not just because of the note, but because my mom found a very soft spot on the floor. And when she looked down, the whole area around it was black. And our only thought was black mold. When we got upstairs, she told me that that area behind the bed was flooded slightly. And let me tell you, that day, we did all kinds of research. Nobody called Kay or Kathy or Catherine lived in our house. So who were these people? We had no identification on the man who wrote the note either. But we have since called an electrician to cut off all the power to that room, and someone to, for real, seal everything off. But another puzzling thing is that there's no breaker for that room anywhere in this house. We may relocate the sink, but everything else, threw it out. We also checked out the quote outlet and the quote circle, and Miss K, I guess, did seal those parts up. Our basement has flooded during storms, and I'm actually surprised that that little area wasn't in worse shape. I keep trying to figure out how we survived summers without AC and winters without a heater. I'm still staying out of the basement, and this is reason number 1000 as to why my cats are not allowed down there. Hey Raven, here's another story that is absolutely true. I wish I knew the reason and the purpose behind this, but I guess one day it will be the right time to reveal it to me. I worked in an office as the secretary to one of the directors. Our offices were located in the county courthouse, which wasn't a very wide building, just tall. At the time, we were on the 6th floor in offices that were at one end of the building. When you came in the door from the hallway, you entered the lobby area and faced the receptionist's desk. Immediately to your right and left side of the lobby was an office, and then to the left and right of the receptionist's desk were 2 hallways that led to the back offices. The hallway to the left led to my office. Just before you entered the hallway to my office, there was a pegboard on the left wall with numerous brochures and pamphlets dealing with soil conservation, forestry, cultivation practices, etc. All of them hanging on it. Because the corner of the left front office protruded into my office, I had to deal with an extension of the wall, and I couldn't sit at my desk and see the lobby. My desk was just to the left behind the wall, and I would have to get up from my desk, go around it, and head back down the short hallway into the lobby. This event happened in the mid-1970s. I don't remember the exact date. On this particular day, all the office staff were out for the day, and it was just me and the receptionist. I went to lunch at noon and returned at 1, at which time the receptionist left for lunch. The way the phone system was set up, I didn't have to stay in the lobby to answer the phones, but could easily do so from my desk. The lobby door was a heavy wooden thing that had a noisy automatic door closer. There was no mistaking it when it opened or shut. After the receptionist left, I went to my desk and started to put some paper into my typewriter. I heard the door open, so I proceeded to get up from my desk, go around the typewriter return and my desk, and start down the short hallway to my door. I stopped when I saw a man standing there facing the pegboard. I immediately thought to myself, no one wears Madras plaid shirts and khaki pants anymore. He was about 5'7", slender build with closely cropped whitish blonde hair. I verbally asked him, "Can I help you, sir?" I was probably standing about 3 feet from him. I was on one side of the door frame and he was just on the other side. He turned his body completely to face me, not just his head, but his whole body. When my eyes met his, I felt a hard, shocking jolt go into my eyes. The jolt was so hard that it knocked my head back, but I brought it immediately forward again. My eyes were still locked on his. To this day, I cannot tell you what color his eyes were. I'm guessing the time was a lot less than I thought, maybe just a few seconds, even though it felt longer. With his eyes still on mine, he smiled and said, "I'll take one of these." And he reached up behind him and took a brochure off the peg, turned on his heels, and walked away. My eyes didn't follow him because I was still staring at the space he had just vacated. It took the sound of the door closing to snap me back into reality. I'm not a hysterical person, and I'm not afraid to investigate strange noises, etc. So the instant that door closed, I immediately took off after whoever this guy was. Like I said earlier, it's a narrow building. The elevator housing takes up the back portion of the floor. I checked the stairwell just outside our door and heard nothing. The stairs are cement steps. You can't go down quickly even if you tried. I ran up to where the 4 elevators were, and there was a crowd of people waiting, and since the elevators were notoriously slow, I knew one hadn't come along anytime soon. I ran around to the other stairwell, and there was nothing there. The only other offices were the county manager's office and a coffee shop. I doubted that he'd be in the manager's office, and I didn't see him in the coffee shop. He'd simply disappeared. The only physical way out was either one of the stairwells or the elevators. I returned to the office with no answers as to what had just happened to me. Who was this guy? What did he do to me? I didn't feel any different. Did he put something in my mind or take something out? I didn't feel like he was evil, so maybe he was an angel. And to this day, I still don't know. As the King of Siam famously said, "'Tis a puzzlement." I'm confident, though, that one day, I will know the answers. I never thought that wearing a sports jersey would lead to what I am about to share. But here we are. We moved to this suburban Boston neighborhood a decade ago at this point. My wife got a promotion at work, but it involved us moving to a different state. After weighing everything out, we agreed that it was a good idea in the long run, so she accepted the position, and we moved. The area was great. The school district was perfect for our kids, too, 8 and 10 at the time. Moving was a little rough as we were in between homes, waiting for our house to close, but we made it. The house was great, and in the first few weeks we settled in, learned the local routines, and even met some of our neighbors. including a man that I'll call Dave. Dave seemed friendly enough at first. He introduced himself, talked about how he lived alone. He and his wife were divorced, and their daughter lives with his ex-wife, and he gets her on the weekends. We chatted about where we were from, what brought us to Boston, and even about house stuff, offering to help out with anything we needed. It seemed like your typical suburban guy. Then, one Saturday, I was wearing my Yankees jersey while cleaning out my car. Dave stopped by and started talking to me, but I noticed his whole demeanor changed when he pointed out my jersey. He asked me if I was a Yankees fan, and I confirmed, explaining that I grew up in New York and had been a fan since childhood. It was something that my dad and I had bonded over. That's when he started ranting about several baseball moments that I barely remembered. He clearly was not a fan of Aaron Judge, calling him overrated and overpaid. To be honest, I've always been just a casual fan at best. So I just nodded along, trying to be polite. I watched it on TV, went to a few games with my dad, but really that was about it. So his reaction and becoming so animated about it, I knew it was part of his personality. To each their own, though, like what you like. But from there, that's when things started getting weird. At first, it was just me getting the cold shoulder or dirty looks. I would see him outside when I grabbed the mail or took out the trash bins and tried waving, but he would just ignore me. It was a stretch, but I figured maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he had his mind on something else and didn't realize I was waving at him. I just let it go. But then he started complaining. While my kids were outside playing in the yard, I would hear yelling from a grown man. I would pop outside and saw Dave yelling at the kids that they were being too loud. But yet, I didn't even hear the kids whatsoever. I had been in the kitchen right by a window pointing out into the yard that they were in, and all I could hear was him yelling. He was clearly much louder than the kids. He even got mad at them when they were kicking around a ball, claimed that it was going to hit his car. His car was in his driveway on the other side of his house. If my 10-year-old would have been able to kick a ball up that high and that far, I would have put him in football or something. But there was no way that they would have hit his car. One time he even called the police because my son and his friend kept suspiciously riding their bikes past his house. They were both on the sidewalk, riding with traffic and going around the blocks, so yeah, they rode past his house, and everyone else is on the block several times. Thankfully, the cops didn't take it seriously, agreeing that they hadn't done anything wrong. I know that really seemed to piss Dave off with how the cops left with both of us smiling and waving. Now, these were all on different days, so the first few times I assumed he was just in a bad mood. But it just continued, and I started to believe that he was just a bitter person or just didn't like kids. Calling the cops, though, even though nothing came of it, it really bothered me. It scared my son, and it was embarrassing having to explain to his friend's parent why the cops were at our house. In the end, I just told the kids to try to avoid him as much as possible. Then, we had a new strange thing happening that didn't involve the kids. Our trash bin started mysteriously filling up between collection days. We'd put out a normal amount on Thursday night, but by Friday morning, it would be overflowing with bags that were clearly not ours. We even started getting warnings from the HOA about excessive trash. We knew not to overfill it. The trash people would often not take trash if the lid wouldn't close anyway. But even with the family of 4, we recycled as much as we could, so our trash bin was never overflowing. When we first moved in, we had some excess trash, but I even made sure to separate organic garbage from everything else so we could throw the food waste away first. If the bin was full, I just kept the extra in the garage and put them in the bin after it was emptied. I know that I may do things odd, but it helps, especially with kids. But we also haven't had to do that since we moved in. The bottom line is, our bins were never full, so someone was clearly putting their bags in our bins. The easiest solution for me was to just keep our bins in the garage until right before the trucks came by. Yes, we had some cameras, but we didn't have one that showed the end of our driveway. We never really had a need for one. I just started working from home for part of the day on Friday so I could take the bins to the curb. The extra bags seemed to stop then. Then, our mailbox was starting to be tampered with. And sometimes it was bent. One time it was completely knocked over. And twice I had important mail go missing. My parents sent my daughter a birthday card with money in it, and it was not in my box, even though informed delivery showed it was being delivered. I tried asking the post office about it, and they couldn't tell me anything helpful other than to install a camera. So I did what I could. I put in a better post, even cemented the bottom into the ground, and got a new hefty mailbox that couldn't easily be moved or pulled off. Then, I finally decided to install a camera that pointed to our driveway and mailbox, since mail theft is a little more of a big deal than using someone else's trash can. That is when I finally caught something. I came home one afternoon and collected the mail, and there were a few brochures for places in New York. I don't mean like some kind of advertisement either. I mean, these are brochures that you would find in a hotel in that state, that you can take. How did they end up in my mailbox? So I went and checked the cameras. To my surprise, Dave walked up to my mailbox, shook it a few times, and then seemed to put his weight on it, to push it to the side. It didn't budge. I did a good job. Then he opened the box, pulled something from his pocket, and shoved it in the box and slammed the door closed. So Dave tried to knock over our box and put the brochures in the box, but why? It didn't make any sense. Why had he done any of these things? And now that I see that he may have been behind the mailbox issues, was he also the one that was filling our trash bins too? So, while he didn't really cause any damage to the mailbox, I didn't report it. I just discussed it with my wife and started taking notes on his actions. I guess Dave didn't realize I had the new cameras installed, and I finally caught him in the act. I turned on alerts to tell me when a person was detected, and when I woke up one morning I had a notification from the camera. It was Dave, walking down our driveway. He stopped by my car, looked around, and then pulled something out of his pocket and started rubbing it against my car. He was there doing that for a good 15 minutes. Then he stepped back, looked at my car once more, and walked away. I went out and looked at my car and was shocked to see a huge spot on my hood that looked like it had been sanded down, in the shape of the letter B. What the hell did the B even mean? Since I clearly had this on camera at this point, I reported it to the cops. They came over, I made a report, and showed them the video evidence. I had no idea why he would do this, and still didn't understand the B, so my wife and I both agreed to press charges. After they finished at our place, I walked from the porch as the cops went to his home, and they talked calmly for a moment. Then Dave quickly became agitated. He started yelling something, and the only thing I heard was, "That's BS." He was slowly walking away from his porch and then sped up, pointing at our place, and started to storm toward us. The cops stopped him before he even got out of his yard, cuffed him, and got him into their car. Clearly, he knew what just happened, and that he was caught on camera. And I didn't feel bad. I didn't know what the hell I had done to warrant this kind of aggression from him. He was fine when we first moved in, but it slowly escalated. But because this wasn't a severe crime, he was back home the same day, later that night. There was an older woman that drove and got out of the car with him, and they both went inside. I just reminded my wife and kids to avoid him at all costs, and told the kids that if he was outside when they were, to not initiate. Don't talk to him and just go back inside. I hated it. I hated that my kids could only play outside when the neighbor wasn't around. It wasn't fair to them, but I didn't trust him anymore. The breaking point finally came about a week later. My kids had just gone to bed, and my wife and I were still up and watching a movie in the living room. I got another camera notification on my phone, and when I pulled it up, I saw a man walking around our driveway again. My wife and I started watching, trying to wait for a clear picture of their face, assuming that it was Dave again. We got more than just a good view of his face. He walked toward the window where the camera was. It was an indoor camera pointing out the window. He looked at the camera, giving us a clear view of his face and his hoodie before taping a piece of paper to the window. The hoodie he was wearing was a dark color with a big red B on the center. I recognized it. It was the Boston Red Sox logo. That's when it finally clicked for me. Was this really all about me being a Yankees fan? Is that what the B was for on my car? There's no way someone would go this far over some stupid, non-existent team rivalry, right? Clearly, I was irritated by this point, so I wanted to confront him. I stormed outside, empty-handed, and yelled at him. I made him jump, but as I began yelling at him, he quickly got defensive. I asked him if this was really about the Yankees thing, and he actually confirmed it. He said that I had some nerve coming to Boston and wearing Yankees crap, saying that my kids were corrupting the neighborhood with their New York attitudes, and that we all needed to leave. I told him that he was insane and needed to get a life, and then he ran at me with a baseball bat. I'll remind you that I didn't have anything on me, so I ran back to the house. I got inside just in time as he started to swing the bat at anything he could. He smashed the pillar on our porch, the steps. He went back and started smashing my car. Thankfully, my wife had a bad feeling from the start and she called the cops, and then shifted the camera so that it was pointing at part of the window that wasn't covered. So, it caught him running at me with the bat. Not that it mattered too much, because our Ring camera caught most of him trying to destroy our porch. The cops showed up quickly and managed to get him on the ground and once again cuffed. We pressed charges for all the damage, the threats to me, and then filed a restraining order so that he could not be on any part of our property. I was pissed. Like I said, I was a casual fan. I didn't dislike the Red Sox either, so I may have even watched a game with him if it ever came up. But instead, he chose violence over a shirt. He could have put my kids in danger because of his problems with me. I wanted us to just leave for my kids' safety, but this all happened in less than a year of us being in our new home, and we really didn't know what to do. Apparently, he took the restraining order and more recent charges seriously, because we didn't see him after that. I saw him angrily watching us from a window once, but that was it. Then, one day, I saw that same older woman and another man show up there. The three of them then carried several boxes and bags from his home, put them in the man's truck, and left. I think he moved. I didn't see him after that, but I did see that other couple several times, bringing out more boxes and furniture. I later learned from another neighbor, one that was actually quite kind, that the people I saw were his sister and brother-in-law, and they told her that he was moving in with them. Dave had a bad temper before us, but we were just enough to send him off the deep end, I guess. All I know is that I'm glad he's gone, because if a jersey was enough to set him off, then there's something deeper going on, and he needs help. But at least now my kids could continue playing outside without worrying that a maniac with a bat might chase them down too. Hey there. I saw you mentioning some story topics, and for once, I think I have a story you can use. I want to start by saying this is a pretty serious topic, so just a warning to anyone listening. But I also want to say that I'm okay, and so are my siblings. We're all happy and healthy now, but as young children, things were very, very different at home. My dad was out of the picture right after my little brother was born. I was 6 at the time. A few years later, my mom got pregnant again and had my baby sister, and I have no idea who her father is. I'm not even sure if my brother and I share a father. But either way, there was no father figure in our life, since I was 6, and my brother and sister never even met one. It was just our mother. At the time of the events I'm going to share with you, I was 12. My brother was 6, and our sister was barely 2. My mom had always been a little off. Paranoid may have been putting it nicely. She hated our neighbors, claiming they were always spying on us, so she always kept the curtains closed. She used to greet my brother and I at the door when we got home from school because she would quickly usher us inside, and then close and lock the doors like someone was going to try to barge in. But then she just slowly got worse. Now, it wasn't just the neighbors. It was the government, my dad, or sometimes even the mailman if they lingered just a bit too long at the mailbox that was out to get her. And she would make comments about how they all thought they were better than her. It got so bad that she barely worked. I don't know what she did during the day while we were in school because she was typically home by the time we got there, but somehow she had some money. It was never a lot. I would bet that she didn't have a conventional job, that's for sure. I don't know who would even be hiring her in the condition she was usually in. There was barely any food in the house. The one thing she did do right was whatever paperwork she needed in order for my brother and I to get free lunch and breakfast from school, it was always done. If we didn't eat there, we may not eat all day. I brought home what I didn't eat, or sometimes my 2 friends would give me what they didn't want. They didn't know about my home life because I was too embarrassed and scared to tell them. I did, however, tell them that I didn't waste food because that's what my mom taught me, which I guess wasn't a lie. With what little we had, I tried to stretch it, and yes, I mean me. My mom didn't cook. When she did have money, I would have to beg or complain to her that we needed food, especially for my little sister, who couldn't exactly eat all solid foods I had. So she would buy ramen or anything we could make in the microwave. I remember one time she asked me to make spaghetti for her birthday, one of the few times that she was kind of normal. I barely knew how to cook myself, but I did my best with what we had, which was ramen with ketchup and salt. She seemed to like it. I hated it. After my sister choked on a nugget I brought home from school, I stuck to giving her soft foods like noodles, mashed potatoes, or bottles of milk that I once again brought home from school. She had a bottle wherever she went, even if it just had water in it. So, that was my life. I was the parent more than my mother, and I made sure we were all fed the best I could, bathed, and sometimes I hand-washed our clothes with dish soap or shampoo. Whatever we had because the washer stopped working. I only felt bad that my baby sister, Maya, had to stay home with my mom because I had nowhere I could take her. While it was a struggle, it was the only life I knew, so I just lived with it. My mother, however, slowly deteriorated more and more. She ended up covering the windows with whatever she had. I watched her steal the neighbor's paper next door once. She would use newspapers, random paper, or bills we got in the mail. She even nailed the curtains across the kitchen window, so that it couldn't be opened or any chance of looking through it. She muttered about how they don't care about any of us, and they would rather watch us suffer than help. She would get angry and yell about how it was all their fault. I did what I could to ignore it and keep Maya and my brother Jeff occupied because, otherwise, she would go berserk on them if they stared at her too long. Jeff learned and would no longer watch her, but Maya, still a baby wanting that affection and connection from her mother, wouldn't. It only made it harder when she would scream at Maya for staring at her, making her cry. But let's speed this up and get to why I'm actually writing this. We came home from school one day, and after putting all of my weight on the door to get it open, I saw that there was a pile of stuff in front of the door. All debris and broken furniture pieces. My mom had broken apart the chairs for our kitchen table and the rocking chair. I later saw that she had ripped out boards off the back porch as well and used them to board up all the windows and the back door, leaving us literally one way in and out of the house, which was just the front door. The house was dark with just a few candles lit on the coffee table. I assume that we didn't have power again. Maya was sitting on the couch picking at the pattern that was fraying. I picked her up to change her as it appeared she hadn't been changed all day. All the while, my mom continued to mumble about everything going to hell. There was nothing left for us. Everything was infected with madness. I just gave Jeff a look of please ignore her, thankful that we understood each other through our facial expressions alone. Jeff took Maya to his room to play while I did whatever I could for dinner. And that's where we stayed afterward. The three of us, in his room. My mom had started staying in my room because she had filled her room with garbage and God knows what else, claiming that my dad was still in there spying from under the bed, so she didn't like being there. The next morning is when everything went to hell. I woke up a few times to hear her in the kitchen. I kept hearing glass and silverware clinking, like she was mixing something. I figured that she was doing what she normally did, so I just went back to bed. But as we got ready for school, she refused to let us leave. She looked absolutely insane. She had this wild look in her eyes that I had never seen before. She kept saying that we couldn't go outside because it was too dangerous now, that they were coming to get us today, and that she had a plan to keep us safe. That is when she brought out this 2-liter Coke bottle that was filled with a cloudy green liquid. I assumed this was possibly what I heard her mixing that night. She placed 3 glasses on the table and a bottle. Maya was in her high chair while the rest of us stood, not having any chairs at this point. She poured the liquid into the glasses and bottles and told us in the calmest voice I'd ever heard from her that we all needed to drink it at the same time, and then we could all go somewhere better together. I immediately did not feel good about this. I could smell the chemical smell immediately as she poured it. I was only 12, but I knew this wasn't right. I asked her what it was, and she called it medicine. I asked her what the medicine was for, saying that none of us were sick, but she got defensive. She told me not to question her and that it was going to save us from what was coming. I was terrified, but I had to think fast. I didn't know what this could do to us, but something told me not to drink it. She took a big gulp of her glass and made a pained face as she swallowed. She then motioned for Jeff to drink it. I told him not to, and I could see the anger growing on her face. I told her that we should go from youngest to oldest, since Maya and Jeff wouldn't be able to help themselves, and that I should be around to help. She stared at me for a while, and I thought she was going to call my bluff, but then she agreed. She told me to help them get settled as she went to the living room, talking about writing her notes for them to find. Again, Jeff and I locked eyes, and I told him no way are we drinking that. I poured his glass down the sink as my mom shouted about us all drinking it together in the living room. I was trying to figure out how to mask this weird-looking liquid and make her believe it. I poured out Maya's bottle entirely and just put a smidge on her chin and shirt to make it look like it spilled, and explained to Jeff to just let the remnants touch his lips when he went in there, to show that he was, or had, drank it. That only left me. I poured some of it out as well, and then we all walked into the living room. As I suspected, she was suspicious of us since there was no bottle, and Jeff was carrying an empty glass. She wanted us to drink it together. Looking at her glass on the table, it was already empty. She took Maya from me and looked over her mouth, and then demanded to smell Jeff's breath. She must have been satisfied because she allowed Jeff to sit on the floor as she continued to squeeze Maya. I still had a glass half full that she was expecting me to drink. I took a small sip, and it was as awful as it smelled. There were curdled bits of what I assume was milk. It was fruity, like Kool-Aid, but there was something else in there. Something that was definitely chemical. Something that immediately made my insides feel like they were on fire. And my mom watched me swallow it. I was terrified that if I drank that entire glass, I was going to die or at least be in serious trouble. I tried to distract her to get her to look away, and thankfully that came when Maya started crying. My mom looked down at her, and then Jeff tried talking to both of them to distract them. As they did this, I quickly poured most of my glass into my lap. I was already sitting by a pile of blankets on the floor, so I just grabbed one to cover my pants up, and then brought the cup back up to my mouth as if I was downing the rest. When I finished, my mom and Jeff looked back at me, and my mom seemed to be satisfied that I had drank the last of it. Maya, however, would not stop crying, probably sensing that something wasn't right, or maybe because she was uncomfortable. I could tell that my mom was squeezing her really tight, and I feared that she was going to suffocate her. I assumed she was doing this because she also looked pained. My mom was sweating and turning pale, and it made me cry, thinking we all could be sitting here like that if we had drank that stuff with her. With nothing else to do, Jeff and I sat on the floor as we watched my mom squeeze Maya. Maya screamed and cried, and so did we. Then my mom seemed to loosen her grip. She looked at me and said that we were going to be safe now, and then shortly after, she began convulsing. Maya fell off the couch, and I quickly got up to grab her. I told Jeff that he needed to go get help, and we started to move stuff from the door as I held Maya. We moved enough stuff for him to squeeze through the door, and I put Maya down so I could clear the way more. It felt like forever watching that door, looking back at my mom to see if her chest was still moving, and trying to keep my sister calm, but finally my brother came back with our next-door neighbor. The look on his face as he entered the living room immediately made me feel embarrassed, like the state of our home was my fault. But after he put his fingers to my mom's neck, he asked me what we drank. I told him that I didn't know, but I showed him the glass and the bottle that she poured out of. I'll never forget his face when he sniffed it and immediately pulled his head back with his eyes wide. The rest happened so fast that it all just kind of blends together at this point. The neighbor told us an ambulance was on the way, and I remember pleading with him to save us. We all went to the hospital and got checked out. I had some other medicine I had to take. I had an IV in and was asked a lot of questions. I remember how scared I was in the hospital, not having my brother and sister near me, asking where they were. After speaking to a nurse or doctor, a couple came in that I had met a few times before a long time ago. It was my aunt and uncle. My uncle was my dad's brother. They asked me about living with them, and I asked about my siblings, and they said that they would be joining us. I didn't care as long as those two were with me. And that same day, another lady showed up that I didn't know, and she began asking me a lot of questions about my mom and our life with her. She asked me how we got to school, how we ate, did our homework, what we did about needing new clothes or shoes, and the entire time she looked so sad as I told her. I didn't know who she was at the time, but I know that she wrote a lot of stuff down and talked to my aunt and uncle when I wasn't around. That night, at home, was the last time we ever saw our mom. To be honest, I was relieved to hear that she wasn't dead, but I didn't want to see her. From what I understood, what I witnessed, and what she put us through, I was afraid of her. She really tried to kill all of us. And when I was older, I learned that it may have been because of a CPS complaint. They were going to be coming to our house for a welfare check on us, and she thought that was the best ending for us. The lady that was at the hospital was our caseworker. My dad left, probably seeing how bad she was and not wanting to be a part of it, but he left us with her and never bothered to come back. But apparently the school could tell something wasn't right, and never being able to get a hold of my parents, they reported it. Thankfully, my aunt picked me up from school one time when I got sick and had a fever. My mom, of course, wasn't going to be able to come pick me up, and my aunt was listed as an emergency contact. I still have no idea why he would have done that because I've only met him a few times when my dad was still around. If she hadn't been listed, we may have been separated and put into foster homes if they didn't find a relative for us. And thankfully, they were willing to take in 3 kids as well. They already had 2. My mom was committed to a state psychiatric facility, and she never asked about us, and we never asked to see her. My aunt and uncle turned out to be amazing guardians, and my cousins were very patient with us, as we took up some of their space too. I'm 34 now, and as I said in the beginning, I'm doing much better. My sister doesn't really remember much, thankfully, and she calls our aunt and uncle mom and dad. I saw my dad once or twice on Christmas, but it was really awkward. He didn't treat us like we were his kids, my brother and I, but more so like we were his nephews. I didn't even call him Dad, just Stuart, his name. And no, Maya was not his daughter, so we don't have a clue who her biological father could be. But there's the whole story of how my mom tried to poison and kill her 3 kids. We made it out, and the bond we have is even stronger. We're always looking out for each other. I'm just happy that while it was not a good place for any of us in the beginning, that we all came out with a better ending. Even my mom. The Raven Mocker. This one is actually on the list quite unironically. The fact that it ends up being so on the nose, however, is the textbook definition of an added perk. Thanks, Tom. So the Raven Mocker, or Kalanu Akeleski, Death Spirit, can assume several forms in its endless quest for life essence. As a malevolent witch, they will often assume the form of a withered or aged person in order to blend into society and freely stalk their prey. But this is by no means the only form this monster can assume. They can also become a fiery figure, flying through the night with their arms outstretched like wings, and emitting the dive call of their namesake. Ravens are commonly associated with death, and are often considered harbingers of, and this legend makes it very easy to understand why that thread so firmly binds death and ravens. These beings are said to prey upon the elderly, the sick, and the dying. It's said that groups of raven mockers will gather at the bedside of a very sick individual and then torment the victim mercilessly until the time that person passes away. They will do such things as poke and prod at the ill person, and even lift them up and throw them from their beds, leaving them to die upon the floor. When the raven mocker's prey has perished, the beast will then consume the person's heart, absorbing whatever remaining years of life that were meant for the ill person. And this is done without leaving a single mark upon the body. This hunger for life force is insatiable to the Ravenwalkers, and they are always in search of their next victim. These entities are so fearsome that even other witches and practitioners of taboo arts prefer to give the Ravenwalkers a wide berth. These creatures are also very easily able to blend into our society and move around unseen, and get close to their prey. It's said that only skilled medicine men are able to identify them. The legend also goes that if one sees a Ravenwalker in its true form, and one knows that it's a Ravenwalker, then the beast will die within 7 days. And this is the only known way to kill one. This is one cryptid that has been haunting the nightmares of children for a very long time, as their family would tell them horror stories of the predatory witch-turned-monster. Coming from a family with a Cherokee lineage, even I would hear some of the old stories, including ones about a relative of ours that was allegedly tormented and killed by Ravenwalkers. These stories came from my great-grandmother, who told my great-uncles and grandpa, who told their children, who, in turn, shared it with my generation. And that is Cherokee history, keeping in storytelling at its finest, as I've just shared a little piece of my history and culture with you all. That's Tom saying that, by the way, not me. I am not of the Cherokee lineage. That digression aside, beyond a bit of personal connection with the source material, I just think this is a really fun legend to think about, to investigate. Just one of those things, if you think about it too long, and it just really sort of sinks into that really vulnerable place and gets you. From an analytical perspective, this tale really hits on many of what you could consider our most primal fears. Not irrational fears, but things that over the course of evolution and adapting to our environment, we have learned to develop as a survival instinct. The fear of being observed by an unseen predator. The fear of being attacked while ill or in some other extra vulnerable state. This fear of prolonged pain or other torment. The fear of having what is precious taken. And of course, the fear of all fears. Our innate fear of death. Because these creatures observe us, completely unknown, posing as members of our own community, they wait until we are at our most vulnerable, too sick or infirm to defend ourselves, and then, sometimes, in number, come to our bedsides and torment us relentlessly until our spirits can no longer take it. And then, in the ultimate act of subjugation, without even defiling our physical body, they devour our heart and steal that which is most precious of all, our very limited time on this planet. Hi, Raven. I may or may not have submitted a post where I briefly mentioned this listing off mostly mundane paranormal experiences, but I'm here now to share something that felt like too much of a coincidence. It's not scary, exactly. Compelling, perhaps? When I was 21, I lost my mother. It was sudden and unexpected. I was newly married and 7 months pregnant. It's safe to say that I was going through a lot that year with several ups and downs with a twist or two. My relationship with her wasn't the best, but not the worst. A little backstory. Growing up, we lived with family as she couldn't financially support herself. She received disability checks, so she was always home. In life, my mother suffered from serious mental health issues. Schizophrenic paranoia disorder, manic depression, anxiety, and alcoholism. She did the best she could as a single mother in a time when mental health was stigmatized and misunderstood. All her life, she would periodically have meltdowns. Some alcohol and trauma dumping induced, and psychotic episodes where she was not in her right state of mind. It's safe to say it put a huge strain on her relationships. On top of that, I was a difficult child to raise. Attention-seeking, headstrong, angry, neurodivergent with ADHD, and stress-inducing. I was that kid that you couldn't take to the grocery store. Once, I refused to go to school and she fought with me so hard, gave up, and then retreated to her room to drink. I think that was when I realized I needed to do better, because I was realizing that she was a little different. That day forward, I slowly became more mindful and self-aware. By the time I was 10 years old, I was aware enough to anticipate my mother's emotional needs. Her aging mother was burning out, and my older brother was distancing himself more and more. She felt rejected as a parent and a daughter, so it made everything worse. It wasn't always doom and gloom. She went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and she made friends there. She was able to let it all out, and I went with her often because, well, no babysitter. Every New Year's Eve, they would host a dance party, dry of course, and I would go with her. They always planned this one particular song emphasizing the importance of a support system, reaching out to your friends and loved ones when you need them the most. It was Lean on Me by Bill Withers. This detail is important, I promise. The older I got, the more prepared I became in regards to her needs. One year it was something else to see her eyes light up so bright when I brought her a Mother's Day card and a gift, like she hadn't expected it. She actually gasped and kissed the card that I gave her. That's how alone she felt. I don't think my brother got her anything that year. He had a home and a family of his own at that time, but come on, man. He could have mailed a card or something. It didn't take long for me to develop a sense of duty as her daughter to take care of her. She was a very spiritual person and believed in the paranormal. Yes, she had schizophrenia, but she had the occasional prophetic dream, and they came true. She believed in God, and in times when she was faring just fine, she believed there was more to this world than meets the eye. Her final years of life had other sets of challenges. She managed to get her own apartment, and she was finally living on her own independently. But the revolving door to and from the hospital, regular and psychiatric ones, continued. In her final weeks of her life, she seemed to finally pull herself together a little. After all, she had a grandchild that she would soon meet. Sort of. The day after she passed away, we visited her apartment. My closest friend at the time even visited out of respect. My brother even showed, to my relief. He was going to handle the funeral, and I was responsible for most of her belongings. I'm not sure how my friend knew, or if they were telling me just to make me feel better, but they told me how it felt like my mother's spirit was still in the apartment. That she was scared, like she didn't know what to do. She had passed in her sleep and didn't know what had happened. This was a shocking revelation, and I really wasn't sure what to think. Emotions were high that day, and we were all on the verge of tears. The energy of the small apartment was changed. In the apartment, I unwittingly sat down in the very spot that she passed away, and something strange happened. Parts of my body that never felt pain before suddenly hurt. Bad. It wasn't because of the pregnancy either. I'm sure of it. My right knee had shooting pain, the same leg that she had a serious ligament tear from a fall. My lower back was in agony, and I had serious chest pain. She was a smoker and on heart medication. I had only been sitting there for a moment before I had to get up and sit somewhere else. And the pain was gone. Just gone. There's a theory that sometimes spirits can leave behind residual energy. I think what could have happened was that when I sat down where my mother left her body, I felt an echo of her physical ailments in life. It's easy to dismiss and blame it on late pregnancy aches and pains, but everything I felt on the couch quickly went away when I sat somewhere else. If it was just me, the chest, back, and knee pain would have kept on. But it didn't. That was enough evidence for me to believe my friends, so I reached my mind out and started talking to my mother. Mostly when everyone was outside of hearing distance. I told her that she was going to be okay, and that we would take care of everything, that she didn't have any of the problems that she had in life anymore, and to look forward to what was ahead of her. I think it helped, because the next day, when we returned to the apartment, the energy of the entire place felt lighter. She was truly gone then. Losing my mother that young hasn't been easy. She was opinionated and difficult at times, but she was still my mom and she loved me. About 5 years ago, when I was working a graveyard shift, house sitting, I'm a DSP and work in group homes. The one I was currently in, everyone was ambulatory and independent. I was watching a Netflix documentary on people reaching out to mediums to talk to loved ones who had passed on. The entire time, I was thinking heavily about my mom, wishing I could do the same thing. This young woman was speaking to a medium where the passed-on mother explained to her daughter, through the medium, to not feel guilty, and that there was nothing anyone could have done, but that it was okay. I admit, I burst into tears crying my eyes out. I was missing my mom. I'd been marathoning this Netflix series all night and was getting around 5 a.m. One of the residents, who usually woke up at that time to smoke, turned on their radio, and it was Lean on Me by Bill Withers. This person typically puts on something more energetic, pop, alternative, or hip-hop. Out of everything, he put on that song, one that held significant meaning to my mom. It was unlike them to play that track. They had no way of knowing what I was feeling at that time, but I was glad for it. It felt like she was reaching out, telling me the same thing, that there was nothing I could have done and that she was okay. This hadn't been the first time that song had come on when I was going through something difficult. I've been at the pharmacy getting something, going through something serious or stressful, and Lean on Me would begin playing. So, despite my rocky relationship with her in life, I feel my relationship grew stronger with her in death. It's strangely put. Sometimes I get flash mental images of her looking younger around the age that I am now. I'm in my early 30s, healthier and like herself as I remembered when I was young. I think that she knows that I'm fighting some of the same demons that she had, minus the schizophrenia. And she wants me to know that she's still here. I hear you loud and clear. I'm a functional adult with a career, married for over 10 years, and my kids are far better behaved than I ever was. Rest assured, Mom, I've got these demons on the run. Thanks for reading my long-winded tale, Raven. You're the best. Let me start this off by saying that I'm an incredibly skeptical person. Like, party pooper, buzzkill, first one to walk straight into an inky black, darkness-filled alley without giving it a second thought. I remember talking to my girlfriend about ghosts, and when I told her that I didn't believe in them, she was like, "You're no fun." She would ask me how I could just walk into pitch blackness like I did, and how she couldn't help but feel like there's always something lurking in the shadows waiting to get her. I guess I figured they can't get you if you believe they aren't there. I remember telling her. I'm a firm believer in seeing is believing, but also believing is seeing. That is to say that if you believe in ghosts, you'll find them in the shapeless swirls that your imagination forms out of the canvas of darkness. I live my life with these principles. I am an atheist who doesn't believe in the various forms of reported ghost stories, alternate universes, cryptids, alien visitation, psychic powers, let alone glitches in reality. unless you have some pretty convincing evidence to back it up. I like to believe I'm a pretty level-headed guy who has a healthier amount of skepticism than most. All you need to do is click on any app and watch flat earthers, reptilian shapeshift truthers, and other comment sections of poorly CG'd paranormal videos, and you'll quickly discover that the state of human gullibility is at an all-time high. Call me a cynic, but I'm not just going to take your word for it. And as for the countless videos of supposed paranormal activity, there are a near equal amount of them that have been exposed as fakes. Why would you fake a video if you've got truth on your side? Being alive as long as I have, I've come to realize that there are far many more people trying to deceive you than there are genuinely trying to enlighten you. That being said, I would like to share an experience I had in late 2024 that I've yet to explain, and that has left me dumbfounded. I was outdoor dashing in early October in a suburb of Northern Virginia. It was my only form of income, and whenever I got the chance to apply at a more stable place, I did. I happened to be picking up an order at a popular fried chicken chain when, in that same plaza, a place that was untouched wilderness only a few months before, I now saw a help wanted sign at a newly opened pizzeria. I've worked in the pizza business before, and I thought it would be an easy transition with better hours and, most of all, stability. So I walked in and applied. 3 days later, I was officially hired and began training with their head chef, Anna, we'll call her. Anna was a 5'0" Hispanic lady with big brown curls in her hair, and she usually wore it up in a bushy bun. She wore a black shirt with the restaurant logo and black leggings, standard uniform for this establishment, and she was on the heavier side. But don't get me wrong, I have no issue with whatever a person feels happy being when it comes to proportions. She's an amazing trainer with a passion for food, something we have in common. 3 weeks in, and I have a 5-day work week with shifts that range from all-dayers to opener till lunch or lunch till close. The restaurant opens at 11 a.m., but workers are scheduled to arrive at 10:30 in order to fire up the brick oven and prep for the day. One morning, I wake up, shower, and get my uniform on. I quietly creep back into my bedroom so as to not wake up my girlfriend, and gently peck a kiss on her cheek, and whisper, "See you tonight, love you," as has become routine whenever I leave. She stirs softly and half asleep mumbles, "Again?" I figured she was talking in her sleep or about a dream, but I didn't pay it too much mind, thinking she meant, "You're leaving again." I left, admittedly, a little early. On this particular morning, the sky was a bright gray, and a light mist was raining down from the sky. When I arrived at the pizzeria parking lot, it was 10:20 a.m. I sat in my car waiting for it to get closer to clock-in time since our boss told us to not clock in earlier than your scheduled time. Plus, I had no way of getting into the building until Anna arrived. So, I wait there in my car scrolling through YouTube videos, looking for something to watch to kill the time. Occasionally, glancing up through a rain-dotted windshield to see if anyone has arrived yet. At about 10:25, I look up from my phone, and there at the front entrance of the restaurant, I see Anna slowly pacing up the sidewalk, making her way to the door. I think, there she is, and break my line of sight and begin gathering the things I'll need for my workday. Phone, hat, headphones, book, and charger, and then I exit the car. I fumble with my key fob to lock the car door and make my way up to the restaurant, trying my best to cover myself from the elements while stuffing some items into my pockets. As I look ahead, I'm suddenly struck with the realization that Anna's gone. At first I'm thinking, wow, she made it in fast. I get to the glass door and tug on the handle. Locked. No big deal. The door locks behind you when you enter and don't use the Allen wrench to set it to unlock. I peer through the glass door, hands cupping away the gray glare to get a better look inside. I don't see Anna. Maybe she walked straight to the back to unload her belongings in the employee lockers. I spend the next few minutes knocking on the glass, first with a balled fist and then with the tips of my car key, hoping to get her attention. When that failed, I figured that she'll unlock the door eventually. She was expecting me along with a few other employees after all. Instead of braving the mist, I decided to wait it out in my car. No use getting soaked before a full day of work, right? I turn around and, glancing once more into the dark building before making my way back to the car. But before I could reach my car, I see a silver van pull into the lot off of the main road. Cold, microscopic icicles form on the back of my neck when I recognize Anna waving at me from behind the steering wheel. But how? I could have sworn that... My mind rummages as I stand midway through the driving lane of the parking lot. I stay frozen there, focused on the image of Anna, whose face is now distorted by the gray glare as she parked her vehicle. When she approaches, she asks me if everything is all right, and that I look like I've seen a ghost. I could hardly summon a nod and timidly follow her to the entrance of the restaurant, mind agape but my mouth holding it together. I remain silent about the incident until she probes further. My total shift in behavior the last few weeks, a dead giveaway. I finally confess to her in the main kitchen at the back of the restaurant, trying to form what I saw into words so she wouldn't think I was a lunatic. I told her, I saw you before I saw you. She asks me to elaborate, and I go through the series of events just as I have gone with you now. It was you. Again. I saw you. Black leggings, work t-shirt, hair in a bun. I even remember watching you fiddle with the lock. The strangest part was that if I did mistake her for someone else, there's no way they vanished that fast. And to where? The space beside the pizzeria was still under renovation, and the other stores wouldn't open for another hour. Not to mention that figure was walking away from the stores that were operational. There was simply no place for her to have gone. At some point, she quivers as though to shake off the creeps before telling me something that gets me anxious. According to her, there have been incidents reported in all the buildings along this plaza that could best be described as paranormal. She recounted an instance where she had arrived at work one morning and claims that she heard voices conversing in the bathroom. When she went to investigate, she found it empty, but the motion-activated light had been triggered before she opened the door. She told me of one late night where all the other employees had already gone home, and she heard the distinct sound of the lockers rattling, as though someone was using them, to which her search had produced nothing. She spoke of an incident that the other lead chef relayed to her about having seen, quote, something surge by the doorway at the rear of the building after hours. She said that she would be the last one to leave at night, and the first one to arrive the next morning, only to find things shuffled around, in places they weren't at the night before. A few days after the restaurant opened, she said that she arrived at work to find the glass door had been shattered into pieces. The boss told her someone had broken in the night before, but Anna found it strange that the glass bits were all on the floor of the outside of the restaurant, as if someone had broke out, not in. A customer who frequents the establishment told us that at the lens store beside the pizzeria where she works, things have happened that she wouldn't go into detail about, because she felt that the more attention you paid, the more intense the encounters became. For the rest of my shift, this heaviness loomed over me. Every unexplained noise or accidental breaking of a glass by a server was suspect. As my shift ended, and just as I was starting to feel normalcy return, I stopped by the fried chicken joint in the same plaza, the same one where I was picking up an order from when I inquired about the pizzeria job for a warm meal. While waiting in line, I could hear the employees there arguing about how someone must have done it, whatever it was, and the reprimanded denying responsibility. After ordering, I couldn't help but ask the cashier, who was not part of that argument happening behind him, if he noticed any strange occurrences at their place of work. As though I was suddenly part of this strange unspoken club, the cashier replied, "You too, huh?" The young employee, being reprimanded, apparently quit and left the building, mouthing his frustrations about being blamed for everything that goes wrong around here. I left. Back home, I'm greeted by my girlfriend, like always, with a hug and a kiss. She follows me into the bedroom, where I peel off my uniform and gather a clean set of clothes, preparing to shower away the stench of the day. "How was your day?" she asked. "Oh, have I got a story for you," I tell her. But before I could begin, she asked me what I forgot to grab this morning. "Forgot?" I asked. "Yeah, you came in the room and kissed me goodbye twice." I end my account there, because it felt like it wrapped up the last of the odd occurrences neatly. But for some clarity, yes, my girlfriend swears up and down that I kissed her goodbye twice that morning. I've never been able to explain it. I have no proof other than my own experiences. I'm still a pretty skeptical person, but now I don't chalk up everyone's strange experiences as merely a runaway imagination. Hi, Raven. I love your channel so much. I adore the way you read, and you're very kind and great with your readers. Thank you, I do my best. I have a few stories that I've thrown together in this email. I saw your most recent call out for stories, so I thought I would finally put my nose to the grind and tell you some of my experiences. Let me say first that I absolutely love your narration style. Please never leave. I won't. I don't intend to, at least. Anyway. Most of these stories are of the paranormal variety, I believe, but you can decide. When I tell people outside of my family, they always look at me skeptically. However, no one in my close family thinks they're anything but the truth. They all have their own stories to tell. My mom had a lot of paranormal experiences from a young age. The first story that she told me when I was older was about living next to a medium who held seances. My mom's parents were having a party. My mom and her sister were about 8 and 10. My mom asked the medium if she could leave my mom and her sister overnight, since it would be a noisy party. My mom and aunt settled in, but they started screaming in the middle of the night because disembodied heads were floating around in the room. I know, crazy. Before anyone says anything, my mom and my aunt were totally sane. No diagnosed mental issues, and my mom was not prone to fabrications, so take it as you will. Next, my dad was in World War II. At the time, she had one of my sisters who was about 4, and my older brother around 3. Times were hard back then financially. She was staying and working for and with a woman who needed help with housework, cooking, etc. An assistant type thing. One evening, she asked if my mom could wake her up at an early hour. My mom said sure. According to my mom, she said she was so tired that she slept about an hour beyond that time. But when she woke up, Ms. B was already awake. Ms. B then said to my mom, "Thank you so much for waking me up earlier." My mom said that she didn't. She just woke up. Ms. B tells her, "No, you definitely came in wearing that blue robe and shook me awake." My mom was very rattled by that. When I was 8, my mom's younger sister, she was in her 40s then, was diagnosed with cancer. This would have been in 1965, so the cancer advancements were not what they were today. The doctors messed up her surgery, and she was not going to survive. We went and stayed in a motel when her sister was pretty bad. We were there for quite a few days. One night, we're in the motel sleeping around 3 a.m. I know, because my mom said something about the late hour, and we heard 3 loud bangs on the door that obviously startled us awake. My mom, my dad wasn't really one to just hop out of bed. and my mom's always been a warrior, opens the door to find no one. The kicker being that it had snowed a lot, and there were no footprints or any indication of anyone being there. A few hours later, we got a call from my uncle stating my aunt had died around the time of the knocks. It seems that it may have been death knocks, which many think are legends. In this case, it happened. We all remember it clearly. Back around 2002, I was living in Wisconsin with my ex, and my dad had passed a year or so before in my hometown of Toronto. I was working at a massage clinic at the time. My mom called me one day at work to chat. She started telling me how my dad kept throwing pictures off the wall. Of course, I'm just taking it with a grain of salt. After I get off the phone, I'm telling my employer about it, making light of it, when the picture we were standing in front of suddenly fell off the wall. So, I guess my dad really did have something to say. It was quite spooky, really. This next part is about my personal experiences. I've had strange things happen my entire life. So, the most recent would be around 2019 to 2020. The story sounds like an average glitch story, but I think it's a little different. I moved from the United States back to Canada in 2018 when my sister-in-law passed suddenly at 65. My brother was in a very bad place, so I moved in with him to help him out. He lives in a house that's now around 108 years old. My brother is totally no nonsense, laid back to the point that he doesn't gossip or spin tales. He did mention to me that a few odd things had happened there over the 35 or so years he's lived there. He kept the house with as much original parts as he could. Apparently, a 4-year-old girl had passed away back when the original family had lived there. Nothing that happened that seemed odd was scary from what I could gather. I would like to explain the house itself. It's really dark in the house without lights. Back when the houses were built, the steel factories were in full swing. The houses were all built for the workers, and they're really close together. There's maybe 4 feet between them on either side, so no light to speak of really gets in. Then, in the front living room, my brother had planted a tree in the front yard. It grew enormously, so much so that it blocks most of the light. The reason I'm explaining this is for the story. People might say it had something to do with the lights, etc. But I can 100% say that that was not the case. So, I was living with my brother taking care of his 2 bunnies. I let them free roam when I was home, and his cat, Katie. I was cleaning the bunny's pen one day when suddenly a turquoise ball or orb flew through my line of sight, maybe 3 feet away at most. I'm thinking, wow, what was that? It was about the size of a squash or racquetball, maybe, and it was blurry as it went by. I couldn't understand it, but thought maybe Katie had thrown a toy across. I don't know. So I searched around, even though I had never seen a turquoise toy. Nothing. It felt very surreal from the get-go. I told my brother, and he also said that Katie didn't have a toy like that, and that it was weird. About 2 months later, I was upstairs on the landing washing floors. My brother had just come in from work, and was chatting with me from the bottom of the steps. I go back to washing the floor on my hands and knees, when the exact same orb-like thing goes flying by again. I yelled at him saying, "I saw it again," and this further convinced me that it was a paranormal thing. No pets were around, it was bright and blurry and very obvious. I don't know what this was. I moved into my own place about 6 months later, and these incidences are still vivid in my mind, and we still talk about it. This next event was maybe more of a glitch, I don't know. I was at my brother's house still, and I came home from work, putting my phone down. I thought either in the kitchen or dining room. A while later, I couldn't find it, so I searched the whole house. I searched my bedroom, the bathroom, everywhere. I searched for hours. I told my brother, and he looked too. I looked in my car too, even though I knew I had brought it inside, but who knows? We gave up and we went to bed around midnight. The next morning, I wake up and my phone is on my bedside table. I'm thinking, oh, phew, I can't believe I missed it, even though I knew I had looked everywhere in my room. My brother comes home, and I told him how crazy it was that my phone showed up in a place that I looked. He stops in his tracks. What? I found your phone down here. I put it on the counter by the coffee maker so you would see it when you got up. We have no clue how to explain this. It's so far out of the realm of possibility, the reality we know. We still don't know how to explain this glitch. Paranormal? We don't know, but it's something. Now, going back to my earlier years, maybe 4 or 5 years old, my maternal grandmother, we're French-Canadian on that side, so that's what we called our grandmother, lived about 3-hour drive from Toronto. We had other maternal relatives there too. I adored that town. We would often go there, sometimes for extended stays. My dad would drop us off. It was fun. Anyway, a few strange things happened to me there. My memere's town was pretty small and quiet. She had an apartment in an older house on a quiet little street. Twice this paranormal thing happened to me. My mom, my memere, and I were standing outside the house. My mom and her were talking French. I didn't understand any French at that time. I was very bored when suddenly I heard singing coming from the sky, I guess? It was choir style. No words. Not coming from any particular place except just around. It was beautiful. My mom and memere were still gossiping, and I interrupted and asked if they heard the choir like angels. They both looked at me and said they didn't know what I was talking about, that they didn't hear anything. I listened and then asked again. No, they didn't hear anything. This happened again a few weeks later. I asked them again, and again they said no, I was just imagining it. I wasn't. I thought of this choir singing year after year. I'm 68 now. I've searched on the internet to try and find something that sounds similar, but nothing I found sounds even close to that ethereal singing. Again, during this time frame, at my memere's house, when staying over, I would lie on the couch where I would sleep. It was hard to sleep on that couch, and I would hear what seemed like hundreds of voices talking over each other. I would try to hear what they were saying, but none of the words were clear. They overlapped too much. And I heard this several times. I know I was pretty young, so people may say that I'm misremembering, but I know what I heard, and again, thought of this many times up until now. I think that when we're younger, our minds are more open and closer to more paranormal happenings. Of course, I can't say for sure, but these are my truthful expectations. If you're not of the mind to believe them, then I hope you enjoy. But please know that I have experienced these things, and they've been with me my entire life. This was something that happened back when I was a kid, so it is an older story, but anyone with kids will find it creepy, I'm sure. Back in the early 2000s, block parties were very common in the area that I grew up in. We had a few of them during the spring and summer, especially for some holidays such as the 4th of July, Memorial Day, and even Labor Day. Those were the big ones. I remember I didn't have school on those days. We usually had the normal people there. Everyone on the block with kids showed up, as well as this older couple that was always nice to me and some other people that I didn't quite recognize. Either way, it was fun because there were a lot of kids around and there was never a dull moment. So, this event took place for Labor Day. School was about to start in a week or two, I think, so it was going to be the one last hurrah for us kids. A few people dragged out their grills, and we met in the cul-de-sac that our house was on. So, not quite a block party for this one, but we still had a lot of people over. It was nothing too crazy. The adults grilled, some people brought finger foods, sides, and desserts, and we had some water activities set up in the yard like a slip and slide and this big sprinkler. It was a lot of fun. Several neighbor kids were around, but most of them were closer to my younger siblings' age rather than mine, but I still enjoyed hanging out with them. As more and more people arrived, I saw that one of our neighbors, Chris, I think his name was, showed up. Thinking about his appearance now, I would say that he was probably mid-40s, looked close to my dad's age. I had seen him around before. Usually he kept to himself, though. I would see him in his yard, mowing, sitting on his porch, or walking around his yard taking pictures, or just sitting out front drinking as us kids were out playing nearby. Most of us, being the polite kids we were, would wave at him like we did to anyone else that we saw, and he would wave back. No big deal. He just didn't really participate in any of these parties, so it was a surprise to see him. He brought a case of beer and a 12-pack of soda, and my mom thanked him for bringing it. I assumed that she must have invited him or talked to him, which was a surprise to me. He got to talking to the adults, cracked jokes with my dad, and when we ate, he made a big deal about my mom's potato salad, so I could tell that she was happy with him. But this is where it started getting weird. After everyone had eaten and was now just sitting around talking, the kids went back to playing in the water. While we played, I noticed that Chris had his camera out and was taking photos. At first, I didn't think too hard about it. He was always taking pictures at his home, so I figured that he was a photographer or something. But after some time, I noticed that the camera was pointed directly at us kids for most of the time. And, after snapping some photos or looking at the camera, he would look around at the other adults. For some reason, this started to feel odd to me. I remember stopping and watching him, and then the other kids, and wondering why I was feeling this way all of a sudden. I hadn't been in a situation prior where I felt uncomfortable, or really even unsafe, so it was a foreign feeling to me. I no longer wanted to be in my bathing suit, and I tried convincing the others to join me so we could go play something else, but they all wanted to continue playing in the water. So I went alone, marching up to the house and watching as Chris sat there staring at the kids and smiling still. He made eye contact with me for a split second as I walked by, and then he winked at me, which added to the weird feeling I was getting, so I ran into the house. I got dressed and sat at the kitchen table, snacking on something, trying to figure out what to do at that point, when Chris and my mom walked inside. She showed him where our bathroom was, kissed me on the head, and then went back outside. He was in there for some time as I waited for him to leave the bathroom. He walked out with his camera around his neck and smiled at me. He grabbed some of the little snacks that were on the kitchen table too, and something came over me at that moment to say something. I asked him why he was taking pictures, and he said that he likes to take them to have memories of these moments. I asked if he was going to make copies for everyone, and he shrugged and said that if anyone wanted them, he would. So he was taking pictures of people he didn't know very well for memories, and then had no intention of sharing them with the people there? So then I asked him quite straightforwardly, why are you taking so many pictures of kids in their bathing suits? That seemed to get his attention. I wanted him to know that I saw him. I saw what he was taking pictures of. That time he got defensive and said he was allowed to take pictures because he was an adult. I don't know where this bravery came from, but I told him he was being weird. I told him that taking pictures of kids and not for their parents was very weird. I remember him looking around the corner like he was checking the front door, and then he walked closer to me where I was sitting. He got uncomfortably close to my face and said that no one would believe me anyways. He then called me a spoiled brat and said that I was just jealous that I wasn't his type, and again teased that it was his camera and his life, so he could do anything he wanted because he wasn't hurting anybody. I wanted to cry. He was way too close, and what he said only confirmed to me that he was the type of guy we were always told to avoid. Yet, here he was, at our party, at our neighborhood, around all the kids, and the adults didn't seem to see it themselves. He finally backed up, chuckling a bit, and then went back outside. But here's the part that he probably didn't realize. My family has always been super close, and my parents have always taught us that we could come to them with anything. They taught us that there were no secrets, especially between kids and adults, and that if anyone ever made us feel uncomfortable, whether it was a neighbor, stranger, or family member, that we should always tell them. No questions asked. And they didn't just say that. They showed it, too. One of my cousins said something to me once that he didn't mean in a malicious way, but could have been taken really wrong. I told my parents about it, and they immediately addressed it. The fact that they took care of it so quickly really showed that trust, which, as a parent myself now, was really important to see. So, after I calmed down some and wiped my eyes, I went back outside to find them. My mom spotted me, and she could immediately tell that something was wrong. She asked if I wanted to talk privately, and I said yes, scanning the area trying to find Chris, but I didn't see him anywhere. And she took me into the bedroom, and I told her everything. I explained how I saw the camera and where he was pointing it. I told her about what he said to me in the kitchen and how it made me feel. I could tell by the shift in her demeanor that I was right to feel this way too. She hugged me and thanked me for telling her, and we both went back outside. We both were looking around for him, but we still couldn't find him. Maybe he left after I confronted him. My mom told my dad, and that's where things really started to heat up. I saw him looking around for, presumably, Chris. He was asking others if they saw him, and finally someone confirmed that he had left. My dad then went to Chris's house, which was directly across the street and one house down. We could see it from the cul-de-sac we were in. My dad knocked on the door, and then he yelled something that we couldn't make out, but Chris never answered. He came back without any contact with Chris, and the other neighbors that could tell something was wrong at this point were asking what was going on. That's when my dad told them. I felt a little embarrassed that this was all happening because of me, but to my surprise, most of the adults also looked appalled. They were telling the kids they couldn't play in the water anymore, and there was a line in our bathroom as we all changed our clothes. The next day, my dad was right back over at Chris's place, banging on the door. I heard my parents talking about it, and he said that he was going back over there, so I went out front to watch. My dad was once again banging on the front door, but Chris never came out. When he got back home, they called the police and told them what had happened. The police then sat next to me in the living room and asked me specifically what I had witnessed, and what Chris said to me, and I explained everything to them again. Afterward, my parents asked me to go play with my siblings and keep them occupied. I couldn't see anything from our bedroom window, so I didn't know what happened after that. I only saw Chris one other time after that, and it was only after I got off the bus as he was just checking his mail. When our eyes met, he quickly went inside without as much as a glance back at me. I don't know what was said to him or what was done, but he clearly didn't want anything to do with me anymore. Over time, we forgot about Chris as we stopped seeing him around. I heard my parents bring him up a few times around others, but that was it. I didn't really ask about him either. Eventually, I did see a moving truck there, and I started seeing a middle-aged couple over there, but I never recalled seeing Chris move out. At least he was gone, and now the only mystery for me was what happened to him. Once I got a little older, something came up and reminded me about him, and I asked my parents about it one evening. They've always treated us kids as if we were equals. There were definitely things we weren't allowed to do or say, definitely boundaries, but like I said, when it comes to talks and being open, they've always been that with us. So they told me what happened to Chris. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much of a conclusion. The police went and talked to him, and surprisingly, he answered for them. They explained that people were complaining about him taking pictures of kids without permission, and his explanation was that he was a professional photographer and was planning on giving the photographs to everyone. The cops asked to see them, however, he refused and unfortunately had the right to. The officers then told my parents that he did have that right, and since he was invited to the party and it was in a public space, he wasn't trespassing. And taking photos isn't necessarily illegal. They told my parents that if we or anyone else caught him taking photos through our windows, on our property, or even if we had any proof of the type of photos he was taking, we could report it and go from there. But of course, after that party, he never showed up again. But that didn't really stop the neighborhood from shunning him. With everyone else at the party, my parents were quick to explain what had happened. Anyone with kids wouldn't allow them around him or his house. All the adults practically ignored him, and my parents told me how one of our neighbors, a sweet older man named Ed, went off on Chris when he ran into him at the post office, which I thought was pretty funny. The police said that they would keep an eye on the situation, and they would let us know if anything else changed, but otherwise, it was a dead end. We must have made him uncomfortable enough to leave, which I guess is fair, with how uncomfortable he made me and the others. My only fear is that he may still be out there somewhere, taking pictures that he shouldn't be, and someone else may not know it. Thank you, Raven, for collecting and sharing people's stories on this strange and scary. Thank you. I love your channel and your wonderful narration. I also love the cover pictures of each episode and the sound effects. Thank you. A great job on the presentation piece in each of your playlists. Your outros are great too, some funny, some sad, and I really like how you end each one. You are loved, you are valid, you're important, you're the best that you can be, and so on. And I mean it every single time. Anyway, I would like to share two of my strange stories. One is a definite UFO sighting, but the other one can fall under the supernatural. A possible glitch, or maybe UFOs. Share what you want, but I only ask that my name be kept anonymous in both stories so as to protect the privacy of the children in each. Done. Thank you, Raven, and take care. In story 1, it's my 28th birthday, in a mid-November evening. Me and my friend B and her 5-year-old daughter T walked to a small convenience store to get some junk food. We went inside, bought our junk, and then proceeded to leave the store. We got as far as crossing the road when T told her mom, B, that she forgot her mitts inside. Mom went back into the store while T and I waited across the road. We live in northern Canada, and even though the fall was in full swing in the western provinces, our winter had already started. There was snow on the ground, and it was a clear, cool night with lots of stars visible. While waiting for her mom, me and T simultaneously looked up at the sky. It wasn't the northern lights that caught our attention, but a UFO hovering to the right of us. We both stood there frozen in place, me with my hand on T's shoulder and us standing close together. There was no noise coming from the UFO, and no wind. and everything around us was silent. And I mean silent. There were no sounds of snowmobiles being driven in the distance, no barking dogs, no one walking close by, nothing. It was just me and T standing there on the side of the road, both of us looking up and both of us very quiet as well. We watched the object in the sky move closer, but neither of us communicated any fear. The white lights from the craft became very bright as it got closer. To describe how bright it was, I can only say that it looked like the lights on a Christmas tree star that was almost touching your face, and you'd have to squint a little so as to not overwhelm your senses. That kind of bright. What we saw was beautiful, and it was amazing. The UFO stayed hovering in the same spot for a few seconds longer, with us facing it, and just standing very still, until it suddenly moved fast and headed straight up into the sky. Me and T continued to watch the craft move higher and higher until it left our planet's orbit altogether, and it got smaller amongst the stars. We were still looking up when B came out of the store with the mitts. B asked us what we were looking at, and we told her what we saw. Her reaction was, "You could have been taken." And by the sound of B's voice, she was pretty shaken up by our story. We began the 10-minute trek back home, me and T still with no fear, but walking and talking excitedly about what each of us had witnessed. We noted how brilliant and beautiful the lights were, how fast the craft moved, how there was no noise from the UFO, and how amazing it felt to see something like that. And even though I moved away from that town a few years later, whenever me and T get together, we still talk about that night. Both of us become excited when rehashing our stories, and both of us are still amazed by the whole experience that happened over 20 years ago. There have been UFO sightings in that town before and after our night, but for me and for T, we never saw anything like that again. T's mom still feels that we could have been in danger and is grateful that we weren't taken that night, but she now also wishes that she saw the UFO too. I'm grateful that we weren't in danger of being abducted, but I'm also grateful for witnessing something so amazing. It's something that has opened my eyes to all the mysteries in the world, and to the mysteries that are not of this world. Keep looking up, friends, and be safe. And story 2. As mentioned in the previous story, I live in northern Canada, where the towns are small and isolated and the winters are long. Snowmobiles in these isolated towns are really the only reliable transportation for the cold temperatures of -30°C and lower. And it's also a great pastime to offset the months and months of short days and long, dark, snowy nights. One evening, just a little after 6 p.m., me and my sister and her toddler went for a ride on a snowmobile. This particular drive happened sometime in March or April, when it didn't feel as cold on the skin. The three of us were sitting on one machine, and we were driving slowly given that we had a child with us. As we were driving to the edge of the airstrip, about 15 minutes away from town, the whole sky just lit up, and then it slowly went dark again. It seemed like someone just flicked on a light switch with white light flooding the town for those few seconds before someone turned it off again. We were away from town, away from a phone, as landlines were our only option for communication, and we were the only people on that road. So we turned around and drove home a little faster. To this day, we really can't explain what happened. We've never heard of any meteor showers happening that night, and it's very rare for lightning storms to occur that time of year. And we didn't hear any loud bangs that would indicate that something big had exploded. We don't know why the nighttime skies fluttered in white light for a few seconds. Was it a UFO or a glitch? Or was it something supernatural telling us to turn around and go home? Or was it just a natural event? I'll let the listeners decide. And thank you, Raven. Hey Raven, as per your request for paranormal stories, this is absolutely a true story, and it, even after all these years, still causes me a great deal of pain and guilt. My family grew up poor during the 50s and 60s. My father was uneducated and had a crippled leg and was limited as to the type of work he could do. He could drive a taxi in the winter and manage painting houses in the summer. He had a wife and 5 kids to support. By 1963, he had secured a job as an airport limousine driver, which he could do all year round. We lived in an old house personally built in 1920 by the original homeowner. Although it had really seen better days, it was dry and had indoor plumbing, so we considered ourselves lucky. It also had other things that weren't totally new to us, as we had lived in other old houses in the past that also had these things. And these things were unexplained noises, bumps in the night, the feeling of not being alone. You know, the usual haunting maladies. We learned from his relatives that lived nearby that the original owner of the house had dropped dead of a heart attack in the hallway right outside the bathroom. I did see an entity there once in the form of a ready kilowatt, once a symbol of the power company. It was pure energy, and it came and went rather quickly. I've never been a hysterical person, so I just shrugged and went on with my day. Not long after we moved in, my sensitive Dutch grandmother came to visit for the first time, and when she stepped 1 foot across the threshold, she said, "There's evil here." I didn't answer her because we already suspected as much. When I was 13, I decided I wanted to hold a seance, but my mother said no. She did allow me to purchase a Ouija board when I turned 15 after I pestered her into it. My sister, who was a year younger than me, and I set up, and we began to try and communicate with the spirit of the dearly departed homeowner. We actually had no idea of how or what we were doing, but it was working, and we actually were in contact with something. But it wouldn't spell any answers that we could understand. It was all gibberish, and sometimes the planchette would just fly off the board. I had 2 older brothers, and the next to the oldest had just gotten married a few months before. It was a Sunday, and he and his wife came over to visit. I finally convinced my new sister-in-law to sit down and try out the Ouija board. At first, she thought I was pushing the planchette, but I told her I wasn't, and that she needed to ask the board a specific question. Her question was, "How long will I be married?" The planchette went immediately to the number 4 and then spelled out years. I clearly remember her laughing and saying, "Well, I hope it'll be longer than that." I eventually got rid of the board and concentrated on my high school education, hoping to graduate one day. We were still having incidences in the house, but we weren't really scared, because we never really felt threatened by anything. If anything, my sister and I both experienced individually a couple of moments when we were actually protected from some evil thing. We were going to our bedroom by way of the living room, through my parents' bedroom, which dumped out into the hall, across from which was our room. We got inside our parents' bedroom and could not proceed any further, no matter how hard we tried. It was literally like a force field. There was a closet that jutted out there on the right that blocked our view of the hallways, so we couldn't see anything. When I went back to the kitchen to tell my mother and my sister what had just happened, my sister interrupted me to say it had happened to her but a few days before. In 1967, the year before I graduated high school, my brother and his wife had a baby girl. She was the first grandchild in the family, and I had no qualms about spoiling her. In 1968, I graduated from high school and got a job. By this time, my little brother and I were the only 2 siblings left in the house, my sister having foolishly gotten married too young. In August of 1969, I was still living at home and riding to and from the city with a neighbor of mine. She always let me off at the end of the driveway, and I walked the short distance to the house. I came home to a deathly quiet house. In the kitchen, food was in pots and pans on the stove, still warm, and the table was set for supper. But no one was there. I couldn't even begin to imagine what had happened. About 10 minutes later, I heard my father's car drive up, and there they all were. My mother informed me that my sister-in-law had been in an accident, and that we needed to call my brother and get to the hospital. She was driving a Volkswagen Beetle, and she did have a tendency to drive it a little faster than she should have. The accident was a one-car accident, and to this day no one knows for sure what happened. The trooper thought some teenagers were racing down the hill toward her and encountered her coming up around the blind curve at the bottom. She ran off the road and overcompensated on getting back on, causing the car to flip. I won't go into the tragic details of the accident, but will say that my niece was spared. When the car rolled over on its top, the back window came out, and my 2.5-year-old niece, who'd been standing in the back seat, came out with it. This was before seatbelts, never mind child seats. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law passed away a few hours later, too badly injured to survive. Now, there was another event that foreshadowed that one. The Saturday night before, my brother and his wife were visiting. We were all sitting around the kitchen table. It's a southern thing. It was a regular summer night, dark out in the country, and the usual sounds of frogs, crickets, cicadas, and katydids, all competing to be the loudest. All of a sudden, the night grew silent, but only for a few seconds. Then, we began to hear a screech owl, joined by another, then another, and another, until there was such a loud roar that we almost had to cover our ears. It sounded like 1,000 or more were just outside the kitchen window. My father went to get his .22 rifle, stepped out the back door, and fired off a couple of rounds. You have never heard such a fluttering of wings in all your life, but they did leave, and it took a few minutes before the regular nighttime chorus returned to normal. We didn't know what to make of it, and I don't think we even wanted to try. My brother and his wife left shortly afterwards. Later after the tragedy, my father told my grandfather about the screech owl incident and was reprimanded by his dad. "Son, you never shoot at a screech owl, especially when he's screeching." Now, the next day, my brother and his wife returned in the afternoon, and my sister-in-law was in such a great mood. She said that she didn't know why she felt so good. They had stopped by a store to get some drinks, and the woman behind the counter noticed how happy my sister-in-law was. When my sister-in-law told her that she didn't know why she felt so good, the woman didn't smile, but told her that her granny always said that was a sign that she was about to die. Of course, my sister-in-law scoffed at that. Little did she know at that time that she only had one more day to live. I don't know when it actually hit me, but sometime right after the funeral, I realized that the Ouija board prediction had come true. My brother and his wife were married on August 4th, 1965. She was killed on August 25th, 1969, 4 years after her marriage to my brother. I've always felt guilty for convincing her to do the Ouija board with me, but people have told me that her life was already planned, that the accident was already her destiny, and that's how the demons knew. Yes, they are the moderators of the Ouija board, because they can see the future. After she did the Ouija board with me, we never mentioned it again. I doubt she even gave it a second thought and put it completely out of her mind. Even so, I still feel guilty somehow. Hi, Raven. I mainly listen to your glitch episodes. They pair nicely with the true crime and high strangeness podcasts that I listen to in excess. I was listening to Glitch in the Matrix episode 101 when I heard you mention the need for childhood scary stories, so here's mine. Oh, you're a Spotify listener, I see. Nothing like this has happened to me before this event, and nothing like this has happened since. I grew up on my great-grandmother's property in a small town in Northern California. The part of town that I lived in was kind of rural. The property that I lived on covered about 4 acres, and I could see my neighbors' houses through the trees. The land was home to a horse ranch in its prime, and a few buildings sat in the center of the land, surrounded by open fields, ponds, and trees. The home that I lived in was the same one that my mother grew up in, and before it was either of our dwellings, it was a stable for the horses that once inhabited the property. Many times in my life, when people have sarcastically asked, "What, were you raised in a barn?" my answer has always been yes, and I lived above a goat named Bobo. That's beautiful. All jokes aside, this was a barn/stable that had its upper level remodeled, perhaps not all the way up to code, into a small apartment by my grandfather, and I did live above a goat named Bobo. When I was little, my parents were just beginning to develop their deep Christian beliefs. My mom, a goth girl in the early 90s, had found her faith at a Baptist revival in the Deep South shortly before I was born, and carried it with us to California. She was dead set on raising her little girl with the religious guidance that she never had as a child. So my Sundays were always filled with either church or at-home Bible studies. She would never shy away from darker topics, like sin, hell, and damnation. So I was very familiar with the concept of the devil and demons, but incredibly sheltered otherwise. My bedroom in this refurbished barn was pretty small, and had a sloping ceiling. In the far right corner of the room, my grandfather had built a 2-foot deep closet that met with the slope in the ceiling and attached a dresser of the same depth to the left side of said closet. The back of the dresser was literally attached to the wall, and its right side was the closet. The dresser did not meet the sloped ceiling like the closet did. It was just a bit under the height of where the wall and ceiling came together, so there was an angled space about 1.5 feet tall at its front edge, which was perfect for displaying a few toys, or, in my teenage years, a hamster cage. I think at the time this story takes place, there was a small standing clock housed under a glass dome, among other trinkets that I had decided to display in the awkwardly sized space. One night, when I was about 4 or 5, this is one of my earliest memories, I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't remember why I woke up. But when I opened my eyes in the darkness, I was facing the wall where my dresser and closet combo stood. There, in the pitch black, in that awkward little space between the top of my dresser and the ceiling, were a pair of red eyes and an incredibly faint black silhouette. I could only describe it as angry, glowing red eyes, almost cartoonish. The faint silhouette was reminiscent of the Tasmanian Devil from Looney Tunes. It wasn't peeking out from behind the items that I had on top of the dresser. Those things were not even present. It was just the eyes and the silhouette. I don't remember hearing it make any noise, or seeing it move at all, but as soon as I realized that something was in my room looking at me, I ran to get my parents. I threw their door open and hysterically told them that there was something in my room. They both quickly got up to investigate and switched the light on in my room and found, well, nothing but the items I had displayed on top of the dresser. I stood there in my doorway describing exactly where the eyes had been, and while they may have thought I was crazy, they sat me down and prayed with me to make me feel better. I believe I had trouble falling back asleep. Who wouldn't? But was soothed by the idea that they had prayed and, quote, cast out any demons that were in my room. As I grew older, I would tell this story to my friends when we were sharing scary stories at sleepovers or around campfires. Until a few years ago, I could barely squeak out the words, "I woke up and there were red eyes in my room," before my eyes welled up with tears and my voice choked out, and an icy fear came over me. I'm now 26, and it's only been within the last few years that I've been able to discuss this without feeling absolutely terrified. I had to really confront the memory and practice talking about it before I gained control of my physical reaction to telling it. I now have a possibly unhealthy obsession with true crime, the paranormal, and that which cannot be explained. I've heard stories in some of the podcasts I've listened to and shows I've watched about red eyes. They don't really resonate with me if they're described as red orbs or red dots, because what I saw were very angular, which leads me to describe them as angry. If I'm not actively searching for other people's experiences with similar phenomena, and the story just sneaks up on me in whatever I'm listening to, just hearing the words red eyes makes my eyes start burning with tears, and that familiar choking sensation will take hold of my throat. Even with this visceral reaction, I continue to search for more stories like mine. I've allowed this obsession to overtake me many times, searching the internet for hours looking for similar stories, or answers, or just something to make me feel like what I saw wasn't impossible. And, to be honest, Raven, that's why I listen to you. I think my best chance of hearing about someone else's experience with the red eyes is from a source like you, where people bring their craziest stories, hoping, like me, that someone else might be able to share their own. I wish I had been brave enough to turn the light on myself when I saw these eyes. I've beaten myself up about that so many times. Was it a demon? An alien? A walker? A being from another dimension? If I had just flipped the light switch on instead of running, maybe I would know what that thing was. Maybe there would have been nothing there to see. Maybe I would have more answers. Or maybe it was a blessing that I only saw as much as I did. Thank you for your time and for giving us all a place to share our experiences. I'm going to start this next part of the script with a small, personally added caveat. That's me, Raven, saying this, not Tom. This script is researched and written by, as I said, good friend of mine, Tom K. Tom is of direct native lineage. You may think, Raven, why are you saying that? Why does that matter? I'm saying that because this next section is about the Skinwalker. This information is being presented by Tom, who again is of native lineage, to me for my purposes, my purpose of narrating and putting the information out there. This is a collaborative effort. Now again, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I, as someone who is not of direct native lineage, like Tom is, have been chastised in the past for talking about skinwalkers and not being native. So, I am not presenting this information as if I have any personal connection to it, nor that I have done the research, nor that I know it, nor am I related to any tribes that speak of the skinwalkers. This is Tom writing this. I know that may sound silly, but I'm trying to put this out there so I don't get flack for it. If that makes sense. May seem silly, it is what it is. Anyways, the Skinwalker. Now, most people associate the Skinwalker with the Navajo legend, but more than the Navajo have stories about the Skinwalker. But back in the days when the different tribes had free reign across the continent, the political situation was always in flux, and through various wars and intermarriages, it wasn't uncommon for the legends to spread from tribe to tribe. So it's really not that far-fetched to see how stories of such a creature could spread so far. Skinwalkers are also possibly one of the best-known cryptids around alongside the Wendigo. They are also, and forgive the awkward choice of words here, but the most popular. Or at least, people love hearing Skinwalker stories. In fact, it's not uncommon for certain creators on YouTube to come out once in a while with a video that is exclusively Skinwalker stories. I've literally killed an entire day just listening to Skinwalker story videos, and that's how prolific the tales truly are. To track down the origins of the tale of the Skinwalker, we have to look back at some of the oldest Cherokee stories, which are all kept alive by oral tradition and passed down from generation to generation. The earliest stories among the Cherokee say that all people used to be able to shift into animal forms, and the various different tribes were associated with the different animals they could shift into. The tribe of the bear, the fox, the deer, the wolf, etc. But over time, as people began to become more civilized, they moved away from the old magic, away from the primal and animalistic instincts they had once possessed. And now we can get into the actual origin of the Skinwalker legend that starts, as with most good Cherokee stories, with the shaman that became a bit too obsessed with his own power. As the shaman grows stronger in his ancient mystic arts, he rediscovers that old ability to shift into an animal, to be able to move undetected among society for who knows what kind of nefarious ends. When it was discovered that the shaman was using what had come to be deemed as taboo magic, he was brought before the tribal chiefs, who cursed the shaman. If he wanted to be so close to the beasts and to live as they did, then he would be stripped of his humanity and exiled to the wilderness with the beast he seemed to be so fond of. And that's not the end of this particular story, however, because it would seem that they had not entirely taken from the shaman his ability to communicate with people, as over time he sought out other shamans and was able to entice them into his world, teach them his taboo arts. Although, now that shape-shifting magic came with a huge caveat, it came with the curse the chiefs had laid on the shaman, and they lost most of their humanity, and were indeed closer to the beasts they shape-shifted into. The curse also bestowed the Skinwalker with a deep and burning desire for vengeance, as well as hunger for the life force of humans. Truly, if we were in Japan, the Skinwalker would likely be categorized as a yokai. Now, when most people hear the word Skinwalker, they probably start thinking about the deep woods in the middle of nowhere. And you wouldn't be wrong to think that. But as time marches on, there are more and more stories of suburban and even urban encounters with walkers. Even around the world, in cultures in which the Skinwalker does not even exist in their zeitgeist, have stories coming out of them that sound a lot like walker encounters. Although, if you really look at the legend of the Strigoi from Romania, there are quite a few parallels in some of the tactics employed by them. Think of some of the stories that are floating around about a Skinwalker pacing around outside of someone's house, calling their name, trying to lure them outside. Now, just replace the word Skinwalker for Strigoi, and you would actually be really close. And Strigoi also have the ability to take a human or animal form, much as the Skinwalker. Just as interesting thing I found over the course of some of my research and felt it was worth mentioning. Skinwalkers have a variety of ways they will try and mess with you. Sometimes it almost seems as if they feed off the distress they cause as much as anything else. They like to make you afraid. Very afraid. They will take on the form of animals, yet they won't look natural at all. Oftentimes, they're described as looking mangy or otherwise sick or diseased. There have even been stories where it's said that they seem almost undead, like some kind of creature that had absolutely no right to be walking around. It's something else that is very consistent in the description of Skinwalkers in animal form is that they have no tail. It's also said that they will mimic loved ones, people you know. Some stories will have Skinwalkers actually shapeshifting into the uncanny copy of someone in an attempt to get close to prey. They will also mimic the voices of people, sometimes people you know, sometimes random people's voices, and sometimes your own voice. When you hear a Skinwalker mimicking voices from somewhere beyond your sight, the voices will often have a very unnatural quality. often equated to the sound of a recording coming through a speaker. Another thing that seems to be kind of universal from story to story is that when a skinwalker is near, the overpowering smell of rotten meat is present. Kind of adds up, though, when you think about a skinwalker appearing in the form of an animal that looks diseased or even undead. The skinwalker is unquestionably a purely malevolent entity that seeks only to feed on our fear and our life force. And they're also nearly unstoppable. One way I've seen said that you can kill a skinwalker is with silver, bullets, knives, etc. The other way is if you know who the skinwalker is and you name them while they're in their animal or skinwalker form, that they will then die. They're undoubtedly incredibly deadly. They're fast, they can be incredibly stealthy, and there are a few things they will not resort to in order to try and lure their prey in. They can also be very relentless. Once a skinwalker decides it wants to hunt you, they can stalk you for years. They're definitely terrifying predators, and not to be trifled with. If you're ever camping and you feel unseen eyes upon you, or you hear uncanny voices coming from just beyond your sight, then you may have just wandered into a skinwalker's territory. And you should probably get out of there before it's too late. It was the year 2000 in Oregon, and I was part of a church-related Boy Scout troop. We had these campouts where the whole troop would go to a secluded place and camp. We often went to this ghost town with the wooded campground across the creek. Coming into the camping area, you have a heavily dense wooded area behind you and to your left, with underbrush so thick that you can't walk through it. To your right, you have a stretch of evergreens that are so tall that you have to look up to see the needles. There's nothing beneath them, so it's just tree trunks and dirt as far as the eye can see. Then across the meadow from the entrance, there's a pond, no bigger than a small house, surrounded by cattails and other reeds. I was the loner of our troop, the one that was always bullied. I was pretty naive about the cruelty of teen boys, and they tricked me into things like eating dog jerky, snipe hunts, or even getting abandoned far from camp with nothing but my flashlight and compass during a fake game of flashlight tag. Due to their antics, I preferred to pitch my tent away from the group, and the trip in question, I set up by the pond while everyone else was under the evergreens. We all had our dinner, our campfire stories, and the scoutmaster had sent us to our tents to sleep. I was bundled up in my sleeping bag listening to the bullfrogs and crickets, just waiting for sleep to hit me. As I was listening, I realized that they were getting louder and louder. I thought, oh, that's weird. And then it all went dead silent. I heard footsteps approaching my tent and yelled, "This isn't funny, guys, leave me alone." But the steps kept approaching. No whispering, no laughter, just steps. Then it happened. Whatever it was reached my tent, and it started shaking the tent violently. I started yelling, thinking it was the other boys and that they were messing with me, when the smell hit. Rotten eggs and something wet and musky. I don't know what it was. I never saw the creature, but it was violently trying to get my tent out of there. It started pushing it, pulling it, and biting at the poles. Eventually, it broke them. My tent collapsed as I screamed. Just then, I saw light through the fabric and heard the thing splashing through the pond. The scoutmaster got me out and into a tent with one of the younger boys who weren't part of the bully group, and the rest of the night passed with us undisturbed. The next day, I tried to talk to the scoutmaster, still thinking it was one of the boys taking a prank too far. He refused to talk about it, beyond saying that everyone was in their tents and that it wasn't any of them. I don't know what he saw, but we were told that we couldn't sleep alone anymore, ever. Our troop was divided into pairs, and I got paired with the same boy whose tent I'd been put in the night before. We did our badge work, did some foraging, explored the ghost town, and eventually, as the sun was setting, we went back to camp and did our nightly routine. This time, the tent I was in was deep in the evergreens. All my stuff had been moved into it, and the boy and I were just talking about the other campers as we waited to fall asleep. That's when it happened again. Everything got really loud and then dead silent. He started to say something, and I shushed him. The footsteps came from deeper in the evergreens, cracking branches and twigs like it didn't even matter. It came right up to our tent, and the smell hit us. The other kid started to open his mouth, and I quickly threw a hand over it. I held him down and shook my head no, praying that he didn't make a sound. Thankfully, he got the picture. He just laid there stiffly under my grasp. The thing didn't shake the tent this time. It just pushed it once and took a really long inhale through the fabric. Then it walked past, dragging something, maybe a hand or claw across as it walked past. We laid there perfectly still, hearts pounding and shallow breathing, until the smell faded and we heard a loud splash. I don't know how long it was, but we just laid there shivering until the forest sounds came back. I'll never know what the scoutmaster saw, but we were never allowed to put our tents near the water at that campground again. We were never allowed to have a tent to ourselves at any of the camps, always to use the latrine in pairs at night, and lastly, we were never to pitch our tents out of view of the campfire. We camped there many times after that event, but the only time I saw anyone camp near the water, they were in a small camper. Even they said that they were woken up to something trying to break in. I personally would pitch my tent as far away from the evergreens and the water as I could after that. It's been over 20 years now, and I still have these nightmares of being at that campsite and finding out that all the scouts died overnight. Of course, no one died in the real event, but I have a feeling that it was a close call. I'm not sure of the name of the place, but the ghost town is a historical site, and they're known for letting people camp. If you ever find yourself camping there, stay away from the pond at night, as it does not like anyone near the water. So, for context, I'm 14 and male. Some background. The place this took place was my grandparents' house in the woods behind the house. Anyways, for the story. So, for holidays or just for fun, we go to my grandparents' house, and I love to explore the woods. But anytime I go alone, I see something watching me. And if I try to ignore it or listen to music, it gets so strong, so I don't ignore it. Also, it's always dead silent unless there's more than just me. But lately it's been showing itself more. The last time I was there, it was with a few family members, all guys, 3 of them. And there's this trail kind of thing. I couldn't run because I would start coughing so bad, but they ran ahead of me. And they were yelling help to scare me. But then one of them says they saw something run across the path. But none remember it. But when I was heading to them, I felt something watching me, so I turned around, and for a split second, I saw one of them. And before anyone says that it was probably my imagination, he was wearing a pink hoodie, and I told them all. Also, if anyone knows anything about this, please tell me. The Tennessee Wildman. This particular cryptid is actually kind of the catalyst for this entire Appalachian-themed episode. And that's because I recently actually got to touch on this creature a bit when I was talking about a missing persons case that I recently covered for the podcast. The case of Dennis Lloyd Martin, if anyone is curious. I didn't go too much into depth on the creature there, as it was about a missing child and not about a creepy critter. But I would be lying if I said the urge wasn't there, because this is definitely a very interesting legend to look into. It's one of those legends that there's just a lot there. The stories date back to at least the 1800s, when it's said that he was captured by a freak show and put on display until the beast was able to ultimately escape back into the wild. And what a spectacle such a beast would have been to those willing to pay and brave enough to look upon. The creature is said to be between 7 and 9 foot tall with piercing red eyes. Most descriptions say he either has shaggy gray hair covering his body or reddish ginger hair. It's said that the creature very much resembles a Sasquatch, but with more distinctly human features. They're also often speculated to be adversaries of Sasquatch, often battling for territory. The wild man is also very, very aggressive, and is known for violent interactions with humans. The creature has been such a problem at times that, on multiple occasions, bands of hunters have taken to the wilderness in an effort to hunt down and deal with the wild man. However, each time such a thing has happened, they've either never found any sign to the beast, or some tragic event has occurred, meaning that there have never been any really fruitful expeditions to hunt and eliminate the beast. The first accounts of the wild man emerged in the 1870s, with reports of a 7-foot-tall beast haunting the area between Sabi and Cranesville, fleeing from men while attempting to abduct women, which is kind of a recurring pattern with the wild man. They tend to attack dogs and pets while trying to abduct women. And while Bigfoot is described as being a far more shy and sometimes even gentle creature, the wild man is not. He's confrontational and very, very territorial. As with other Bigfoot-like creatures, the wild man is also said to have a very pungent stench about him that often heralds its arrival to the area. I suppose this would make it something of a skunk-ape type of creature. I think it's so fascinating that with the Bigfoot-type creatures, one of the universal things, no matter if it's a Sasquatch, Grassman, Wild Man, or one of the other distinctive hominid-type creatures, is that horrible stench. The other thing I feel like bears some emphasis is the fact that in every notable encounter I found reports of with the Wild Man, is that they all mention some sort of very disturbing and often blood-curdling howl or scream, often right before the creature withdraws or flees. Regardless of who describes it, every source agrees that the vocalization the creature makes are very disturbing, alarming, or outright terrifying. From 1871 all the way up to 2012, when the last recorded sighting of the creature came in, there have been dozens of encounters with the beast, ranging from a brief sighting all the way up to the more violent encounters where the wild man attacks a dog or attempts to snatch a woman. With it being more than a decade since I've been able to find any reports or encounters with the wild man, perhaps that's for the best. One final thing I want to mention before wrapping this one up is that the final reported sighting of the Tennessee wild man was in the very same area where the first stories began to come out of a tall, powerful beast man trying to abduct women. It certainly feels like this one came full circle, and that just doesn't happen very often. Hi, Raven. This is my second story, and maybe it's not as weird as the ghost cat, but it's certainly odd. I used to live at one end of a long residential street that took at least 15 minutes to walk from end to end. My journey to and from work involved having to walk the whole length of this road daily. Most of the houses on this road were 3-story Victorian and more or less identical. That was except for 2 which were smaller, older, and cottage-like, and had been farm workers' cottages long before the area was built up. It's hard to put into words, but there was something about one of these two older houses that really bothered me. It got to the stage that I became so unnerved that I began to cross the road rather than walk so near to it. A feeling of apprehension used to rise up in me every time I approached that house, but I never knew why. Eventually, however, I moved and just kind of forgot the whole thing. Several years later, though, I was working a night shift at that same job. This was an out-of-hours call center for emergency repairs, etc., and the overnight period was often very quiet. It was often a case of just being there just in case, and we spent most of the time drinking coffee, ordering pizza, and having in-depth conversations on increasingly bizarre subjects just to stave off boredom. One of these nights, being interested in local history, I was on the town's local newspaper's website, browsing the nostalgia columns, which contained a roundup of news from years gone by. The format was usually what had happened on today's date, but 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, etc. This was 2016, and there was a news item from 1976. Imagine my shock when I saw an old picture of the road on which I had once lived, showing that very house that had once bothered me so much. It was a sad story of a house fire in which a 6-year-old boy had died. There was a harrowing description of him clawing in vain at an upstairs window and trying to escape before being overcome by smoke, while neighbors were powerless to reach him. Horrible as it was, I put it down to a really weird coincidence. A few years have passed, and I hadn't been back to that area for a while. I was playing in a band, and we had a gig in a pub a few streets away. Being a Friday night, it was busy, and there wasn't any parking outside the pub, so we had to park the van some distance away. I was cursing under my breath, as being the bass player, I had a bulky amplifier to struggle with. Imagine my shock when I noticed we had parked right outside that old house on my old road. In fact, there was no other parking space in sight. Immediately, it became clear that the atmosphere that used to surround the place was replaced by a sense of calm. I'm not saying that this was a supernatural occurrence, but it was definitely odd. It was almost as if knowing the sad history of the house somehow pacified the uneasy spirit of the place. Anyway, still loving the channel. Keep it weird. Hi, Raven. I recently got hooked on your podcast and have been binging on weird tales while I work. Nothing makes spreadsheets more bearable than a soothing voice saying disturbing things. If I may interject my own 2 cents on that statement, that is literally where I was back in 2018, 17. Spreadsheets, listening to Let's Read, just doing what I could. So I'm right there with you. Anyways, with that in mind, here is my account of a paranormal situation I experienced early in my career. Back in the early 2000s, I was working at a mid-sized public library in the suburbs of a big city. Basically, a big old building built in the 1910s. The key features were a big foyer with a domed glass ceiling, 2 main wings of library space, and underneath it all, an extensive network of cellar rooms where we kept the closed stacks. The wiring was old, and the lights down there would frequently flicker and fade in and out. Nobody liked going down there, even during the day. I would work a few days there and a few days covering the various branch libraries. I was barely 20, so at first I was surprised, but it quickly became normal to be given a set of keys and an alarm code and be sent off to run a rural branch library all by myself all day. On days at the central library, there would always be at least 2 other people working with me. But due to the size of the building, it was easy to pass a few hours without seeing each other. All this to say that I was generally quite comfortable being alone in the big old building, and except for the cellar, never had any issues. The cellar was the exception. When I first started and before I knew any better, I would be sent to collect things and do so enthusiastically to make a good impression. My first couple of trips, I was more taken up dealing with an incredibly diverse range of musty smells and trying to avoid the spider webs. It was only once I was getting used to the physical side that I noticed the less physical side of it. I would never feel alone down there. Up in the main library with my two colleagues out of sight, I would feel alone in the immediate sense despite knowing they were a shout away. Down there, it felt like someone was right nearby, maybe even in arm's reach. I would always have a feeling of being observed, not in a predator-prey sense, more like curiosity. I never spent long down there. I knew the layout well enough to get in, grab a book, and get out. I would hum or whistle or just do anything to make a bit of noise just in case someone else had come in after me, and maybe they were freaking each other out accidentally. After a year or so of working there, management announced that we would be having some work done on the roof, and that we would have a couple of weeks closed to the public. While this was going on, we'd have the fun of carrying out a complete inventory to clear up the catalog items flagged as missing or stuck in transit, and to generally have a good tidy up. I was actually quite pleased, as the break from the public would be nice. And also, at the risk of being a library nerd, a cleaner catalog is easier to work with. Then it dawned on me that this would include spending a lot of time in the cellar. We estimated at least half the stock was down there, so it would be about half the time. Suddenly, I regretted being so keen to make a good impression with regards to the cellar, but alas, there was an implicit understanding that I'd be covering the bulk of the cellar work, at least 5 days down there. I was stressed out and decided to call my wicked friend to ask for advice. I wasn't really into Wicca as such. I'd read about it and even tried a few spells out of curiosity, but the spiritual side wasn't really for me. I was on board with the practical side. Having some tools to deal with weird stuff never hurts. And she recommended a type of crystal to carry, a polite little introduction I could make when entering, and offered to do some general protection work. I accepted all three and felt more comfortable with the idea. She's not your traditional, quote, new age chick stereotype, and she teaches self-defense classes, and her upper body strength makes her our go-to jar opener. I figured having her backing me up remotely would be enough to make any curious watcher spirits keep to just being curious watchers. Days 1 and 2 went smoothly. I did my introduction speech announcing that I would be spending more time there, and that I was looking forward to a mutually uneventful time. I had a piece of rose quartz in my pocket, the twin of a piece that my friend had set up on her work altar. I would check on it frequently, so it was probably my own body heat making it warm, but I also told myself that it was an indicator that the magic was working. Day 3 was weird. I'd been down there for several hours and was about to break for lunch. It was while I was setting down my work stuff that I checked my pocket and felt a rush of panic. The stone was missing. I looked around the floor where I'd been working, but there was no sign of it. I slowly started to retrace my steps back to the stairs, figuring I could have dropped it earlier, maybe. I doubted that I'd have gone so long without noticing it, but was trying to stay calm. I found the stone on the top step of the staircase, in front of the door to the library. The door opens inwards, so there's no way it could have fallen and landed there without the door hitting it as it closed. As I said my grateful goodbyes, I bent to pick up the stone. It wasn't just room temperature from my lack of touching, it was cold. I slipped it back into my pocket, had my lunch break, and conveniently found some work to do in the library that would take me up to the end of my shift. That evening I called my friend, and we chatted for a bit, and before I mentioned the stone, she told me that she'd been having a tension headache all day that she couldn't shift. I cautiously mentioned the stone, and she went silent. She wouldn't go into detail, but she said that she'd look into it on her end, and later that night would enhance the protection via the stone on her altar. I slept terribly that night. It was probably just anxiety about the cellar and having to go back down there, but I woke up several times with the persistent sense of being watched. I would flick my lamp on and it would ease off, though not fully leave, and I would get back to sleep until it happened again. The end result was me waking up late and having to rush to work, arriving groggy from lack of sleep. I was awake enough to have my rose quartz in my hand as I stepped onto the stairs and whispered the greeting message as I slowly descended. The lights were slowly warming up and the dull glow was building as I moved through the gloam to where I'd left off the day before. I was almost at the back of the cellar, and in hindsight, I wished I had started there so I could work forward towards the stairs. In any case, I had a couple more rooms to do, the ones where the oldest books were. According to our notes, one of the rooms was full of old county council meeting minutes, and the other was old maps of the local area. The room I'd been working in was the last of the art folios. Most of them were damp and speckled with mold. To be honest, I really should have been given protective gear. More than witchcraft, that is. As I worked through the morning, I was checking the stone a lot, and the feeling of someone nearby was so intense, it felt like someone peering over my shoulder. I was rushing and perhaps not doing as good a job, but frankly most of those folios were fit for the bin. I decided I would make a start on the minutes next and then break for lunch. The longer I was down there, the less time I'd have to spend after lunch. I turned to leave the room, and that's when the lights shut off. Not their usual flicker and fade, but a snap into darkness. I froze and held my breath for as long as I could, and I swear in the silence I could hear a faint sound like shallow breathing. I gripped the rose quartz tight in my fist and held it out in front of me, bracing myself for a slow, nerve-wracking fumble along the corridor to the stairs. I stepped forward one step, and my outstretched hand felt like it had gone straight into a spider web. I shuddered and worried that I'd lost my orientation. This should have been a clear path to the room's exit. Luckily, my panic was short-lived as the lights suddenly sprang back on. I was facing the doorway, and there was no sign of webs in my path or on my hand. The room was silent except for my own panicked breathing, and the presence felt nowhere nearby. I took the hint, and I rushed to the stairs with my work stuff. I didn't want to have to come back for it. During lunch, I checked if anyone else had noticed a power cut or anything, but nobody had. I used the inquiry desk phone to call the coffee shop where my friend worked and waited for her colleague to get her. When she was on the line, she immediately asked if the feeling she had just had anything to do with me. She explained that she had applied another spell to the rose quartz and was now wearing her piece around her neck. A few minutes ago, it suddenly felt like an anchor, and she had to stop to steady herself. She'd held it and prayed to her goddesses and allied spirits, sending light through it to connect to my piece and protect me. The weight eased, but she was left with a musty smell in her nose that couldn't be coming from anywhere in the coffee shop. I recounted what happened to me, and she told me not to go back down there until she'd had time to, as she put it, call in the big guns. I thanked her again for helping and apologized for dragging her into whatever this was. I once again found work to do above ground for the remainder of the afternoon. That night, I slept better. This time I had the rose quartz under my pillow. Unlucky for them, but lucky for me, one of my colleagues was ill the next day and I got to work upstairs all day. Checking the main library stock was more important, so I didn't have to ask, which took a weight off my mind. Friday passed without incident, and I was looking forward to the weekend. I visited my friend and we hung out together Saturday afternoon, just being normal people for a change, which was nice. That evening, We went to the local woods, and under the starlight, she led me in a ritual to invite my own guardian spirits to watch over me, and to call for higher powers to lay to rest whatever was lingering in the library basement. I'm not sure that I felt anything magical during the ritual, but it felt good to be doing something. I made sure to keep the name of my assigned spirit in mind and kept a scraping of votive candle wax in a fold of paper as a secondary amulet. Monday morning came, and I had one last trip to the basement. I had my rose quartz, my wax, and my greeting to protect me. And the remaining work could only take 3 hours at most, so I'd be done by lunchtime. I felt as confident as someone being haunted by a cellar ghost could be, and I got to work. The lights did their usual wavering at points, and there was a sense of something down there with me, but it felt claustrophobic. It was at least back to its normal distance, possibly even more so. I think whatever we, or my friend mainly, did that Saturday night had put the presence back to sleep, maybe. It certainly didn't present any further problems for me for the next year or so, at which point I was accepted into a graduate program to qualify as a librarian and gave my notice. After completing my studies, I got a job at a school library in the city and rarely get time to visit the area that I used to work in. I did look up an old colleague online a few years later, and we got back in contact, swapping tales of our professional woes from time to time. Mostly problem customers or managers with no sense of how the library actually runs. The usual. One story he mentioned, though, got me thinking back to my time there. They had taken on a new page recently, who had been settling in well, except that he was refusing to go into the cellar. He was saying that the conditions weren't safe to work in, given the damp and the mold. In fairness, that's probably very valid. But my old colleague said that she overheard him talking to the other pages, and he stated he wouldn't go down there because, in his words, there are demons down there. I don't know if that's true, but there is something down there. Something that woke up briefly when I was working there, and had to be put back to sleep because it was getting too active. I can only hope that the page was exaggerating, or failing that someone re-enchants the presence to keep it dormant before anyone gets hurt. The Sheep Squatch. Point Pleasant, West Virginia is home to a lot of very strange creatures and stories. In the case of this particular cryptid, I won't hold it against you if you have a moment of eye-rolling when you hear the name, as I had very much the same reaction the first few times I heard about the creature. To be completely candid, it wasn't until I started researching the creatures of Appalachia that I finally took a minute to actually learn a bit about this beast. As I said initially, Point Pleasant is a place surrounded in mystery and legend. A lot of people tie a lot of the strange happenings and bizarre creatures to the old TNT area nearby. Some of the stranger creatures are even said to live in the old silos. This creature is no exception, as the first recorded sighting of the beast occurred in the 90s near that old TNT area. In 1994, in particular, it seemed to be a bit of a banner year for the beast, as there were some high-profile sightings of the creature. The first came when a former Navy seaman spotted the creature ambling out of the woods and watched what he described as a quadruped roughly the size of a bear with baby goat-like horns, a long canine face with long saber-like teeth covered in shaggy white fur, approach a creek where it began to drink with paws that almost looked like raccoon hands. He then watched for several minutes as the creature wandered to a nearby road and eventually vanished back into the nearby bush. Later that same year, 2 children reported an encounter with the creature while they were playing in their yard. They said it looked like a bear, and they said it stood up on its hind legs and sniffed the air much as a bear would. When it noticed the children, It became just as startled by them as they were by it, and they say the beast fled back into the forest and was even breaking off medium-sized tree branches as it retreated back to its home in the wilderness. The next year, in 1995, things would escalate as the creature became less, pardon the pun, sheepish. This time, an elderly couple driving along the road spotted a strange hulking white form in the ditch along the side of the road. And much as one may expect, they slowed down to try to figure out just what was going on and what the figure was. What they saw truly horrified them, as they recounted a description that sounded much like the ones from the other incidents. However, they did add one detail that had previously not been reported. The creature had 4 eyes. So far, that detail was completely new, as no one else had said anything about it having 4 eyes. But as the couple were trying to make sense of what they saw, the beast leapt up from the ditch and began to attack their car. Of course, the couple quickly fled the scene, and upon arriving back home, noticed long claw marks on the vehicle where the creature had attacked. While 1995 would mark the first report of a violent encounter with an aggressive sheep squatch, it would not be the last one, as in 1999, a couple that had been camping in the woods behind their home when they heard the sounds of what sounded like an agitated bear rooting around the perimeter of their camp, although it deliberately stayed out of the firelight to begin with. Suddenly, from the darkness, a massive figure lunged at them. The pair fled in a panic, running down the trail back to their home, with the beast pursuing them the entire way. Once they were safely in the house and looking back, they noticed the monster had stopped at the tree line and had not crossed into their backyard. The creature then allegedly let out an ear-splitting screech before disappearing back into the woods. The couple returned to their campsite the next morning and found it completely wrecked, saying that the ground looked as if someone had tilled it up for gardening. One of the most interesting encounters I came across is that of one in 2015, when 6 anonymous campers had a run-in with the beast. It was first spotted some distance away and was in a squatting position. Not long after they noticed the creature, it stood to its full height and began charging down the hill at them. They didn't flee immediately, as there was a river separating them from where they had first spotted the monster. For a while, it paced the opposite bank, looking for some way across, before it finally realized its only option was to wade across. Once it had crossed and emerged from the water, there was a terrible screech causing the beast to hesitate. They say that a look of fear crossed the beast's face before it let out what sounded like a whimper, and then turned and fled in the opposite direction of the noise. I find that last story so very interesting for the most obvious of reasons. What could possibly have made such a massive creature turn and run away in such fear? But then, after just a few seconds of contemplation, I find myself a bit more scared of learning the answer than I'm proud to admit. Hello, Raven. I found your channel through a recommendation from a friend of mine, and have been listening to your narrations every night. Your voice is very soothing and helps me ease off to sleep. Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing so many great stories. So, the story I heard from my late grandpa when I was a kid. He was a Vietnamese soldier during the American War in Vietnam, and he heard this story from his comrade who swears of what happened to him being real. His friend, let's call him A, and his troop, which included my grandpa, were in a scout mission in a remote area in the mountain of Kontum. This region is occupied by the ethnic group people of Vietnam. They have a different belief and worship mountain gods. The population of this area was very low during the wartime, so being able to find a house to stay in was very difficult. So, A's troop decided to divide into small groups to scout and find civilians' houses to stay in for the night. A went off with 2 other guys and found an old lady living in a wooden house way up the mountain. She agreed to let them stay for the night, so they were very happy about that. But the mood really turned from happy to worry when they all got into her house. In the middle of the room, a big closed wooden coffin was placed in a very unnatural and unusual way. They asked her about it, and then the old woman just replied, "You don't need to mind about that coffin. I'm old and don't have any children, and I might die any day now. So I just have that coffin there, so when I feel like I don't have long left to live, I can just go lie down in it and rest." Still skeptic about her answer, and to be honest, a bit scared of the coffin, A wanted to leave. But his comrades assured him that it's probably nothing. Just an old lady living in the woods who just tried to be thorough about her death. Besides, there were no other places they could stay around the area, and it would only be for one night. So they finally settled in. 3 of them sleep together on the floor, just a few meters away from the coffin, and the old lady sleeps in her bed. I forgot to mention that A is very short and had a frail body. Imagine Captain America before the super soldier serum. So A is sleeping in the middle, and his 2 comrades are sleeping on both sides. They're bigger than him. So if you don't look carefully, it will look like only 2 big guys were sleeping there. Everyone was sleeping peacefully, and then A got woken up by a strange sound coming from the coffin. The lid of the coffin was sliding open by itself, and then a pale figure slowly sat up and moved out of the coffin. It was a full moon night with clouds, so he couldn't see the figure clearly, but definitely saw a thin, pale figure. That thing slowly moved toward their spot. A was scared, so he tried to not move and pretend that he was still sleeping. The thing then bent down and was face to face with the guy lying in the nearest to the coffin. A foul stench emitted from that thing, but A tried his best to not make a sound or show any emotions. After a few moments, the thing then slowly walked back to this coffin. At this point, A was frightened and he wanted to desperately move, but fear got the best of him. Then the sound started again, and that thing was now up and went to the other guy on the other side of A. The figure finally went back to the coffin. After a while, A finally got the courage to move. He tried to wake up his friends, but the moment he touched them, he could feel their bodies were icy cold and there were no pulse, no signs of life. At this point, he just freaked out and quickly ran away from that place. He was running frantically in the woods for the whole night until morning, back to the meeting spot of the troop. That was where he told everyone the story, and no one believed him, of course. They tried to find the old lady's house again, but there was no sight of it. The jungle parts of Vietnam are legitimately scary to me. There are a lot of stories about ghosts, witches, and sometimes even demons up there in the mountains. There's even a love charm that they can use to bewitch people to give up their life in the city and move there. The story scared me as a kid, but now I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe the way I told the story wasn't that scary. I'm just typing it out as I remembered it. I can't ask my grandpa now as he has passed away years ago, but I still hope that you all enjoyed it. Thank you, and good night, Raven. Hey, Raven. I thought I would write to you about my state, North Dakota. You probably remember my story about the burial ground child ghost and his wolf a while back. In my city, we have a haunted park called Trollwood. It used to be a pauper's cemetery, a farm, and an asylum. There are stories of the spirits of a woman in a blue dress, a demon with red eyes, and a farmer yelling the equivalent of "get off my lawn." There is one other, a cemetery guardian. They say they dug up and reburied the dead elsewhere, but I can tell you, the guardian remains. A friend and I dared an after-dark trip. We entered and it seemed okay at first, but within the first 10 minutes, a shadow approached. I could see from the waist down a pair of legs. We stopped, and I attempted to ask it if we could pass. Nope. It ran at us. And I'm not ashamed to say that we ran. I brought equipment which alerted me by voice of a, quote, guardian. I was correct. The second story takes place in a trailer park. My parents were buying a trailer home for the family farmstead, so my mom and I went to take a look at it. As we stood outside, I turned around, my typical ghost sense going off, only to see a large group of shadow spirits doing a thriller-like zombie walk through the park. It terrified me. I immediately told my mom, "We're leaving now?" She hates what I see, so I saved her from the information. There are a lot more stories that I will send you. The city's like a train depot to the dead. Fun times. But thanks, Raven, and keep being awesome. When I was in my early 20s, me and my girlfriend were visiting her mom at her double wide out in the middle of nowhere in Owlgrass, Michigan. The year was 2008. Her house was at the end of a long-ass dirt road called Manor Road, which then curved to the right and became Green Drive. This road was really close to the Saginaw Bay. There were houses all on the right side of the road with old canals that had quite a bit of water at one point in the past. Anyway, me, my girl, my niece, and her boyfriend went to Tawas to bar hop. The night felt negative. None of us were getting along. We were arguing and fighting all the way back to her mom's in Algris. My grandma had died recently, and I was fairly upset about that as well. When we got back to her mom's, everybody went in the house. I stayed in the car, which was parked in the road. I had my head on the steering wheel, and I was crying. I was just in a bad place. It was twilight and had just begun sprinkling rain. I looked up, and on my beautiful sun, Wyatt's life, there was a tall, blacker than the twilight around it shadow figure roughly 7 foot tall, with little white pin dots for eyes, long arms, and long fingers, freaking staring a hole right through me from the goddamn roof of the double wide. The image is burned into my memory, and will be until the day that I die. But not the end of story. Yeah, it gets freaking crazy. So, when I look up, we stare at each other for, I could honestly not say how long. It could have been more than 5 to 10 seconds. I see the porch light come on from the other side of this thing, and then the shadow of the front door swings past this thing. And it disappeared when the door shadow swung on back. I freaking bolt out of the car, up the ramp to the front door, and burst through the door. I see everybody drunkenly brawling and arguing with each other. I yell through, excited, maniacally labored breathing, "There's a freaking shadow!" And then it happened. Whatever the hell was on the roof slammed down on the spot that I saw it standing so damn hard that the whole double wide shook. It was insane. Everyone stopped what they were doing and froze. They all looked at me, and I said, "Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. Something is on the roof." Everyone remembers that night like it was yesterday, and I'll never, ever forget it. It's one of those things that's changed how I looked at the world. This actually happened. Believe me, don't believe me, it makes no difference. My ex's mom has since passed, and I'm 44 years old now. The trailer isn't there anymore, but the memory is. The Moon-Eyed People. This happens to be possibly one of the oldest legends in North America. And I know that's saying something, but please, hear me out here. The Moon-Eyed people were first encountered by the Cherokee when the Cherokee first arrived in Appalachia. The specific area they encountered them were in eastern Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas. So, when we even bring up the Moon-Eyed people, we're talking about a literal civilization that was present in the southern US that predates the Cherokee by quite a margin. By the time the Cherokee had arrived and encountered these strange people, the MEPs had already built impressive stone structures through the area. You can even visit one of these sites at Fort Mountain State Park, where they still stand the entirety of the Great Stone Wall that was constructed before the Cherokee, or any documented European settlers, arrived. Before I drag you any deeper into this, I should probably make a mention that the Moon-Eyed people, and the existence of, is pretty controversial, and highly debated still to this day. The Cherokee encountered them first, but as most Cherokee history is passed down in oral form and rarely, if ever, documented in a written form, this, of course, to the more academic-minded, immediately casts doubt upon anything the Cherokee have passed down through their oral traditions. The settlers heard tales of the MEPs through various contacts with the Cherokee tribe, who they considered to be one of the 5 civilized tribes. But it wasn't long before they allegedly began to encounter them as well. So, just what do these Moon-Eyed people look like, and why are they called Moon-Eyed? Well, we do have some descriptions, and even carved likenesses in stone. And a really good idea as to why they were called Moon-Eyed. These MEPs were short, pale, and blue-eyed. The eyes are said to be large and saucer-shaped. They also wore long beards, which was very unusual to the native tribes of the area. We also know these MEPs to be very nocturnal. The stories the Cherokee tell of the MEPs talk about how they were only active at night and rarely left their stone fortress during the day. This has led to speculation that they are blind during daylight hours, or at least have such impaired vision that they only become active at night. Another very big part of the Cherokee saga is the fact that from the very beginning they were at war with the MEPs. In fact, the Cherokee weren't the only tribe in the area that had multiple armed conflicts with the Moon-Eyed people. Ultimately, the Cherokee came out victorious in this war, and that was how they came to be the dominant power in the southern US. I'm not exactly sure which side started the hostilities, just that the conflict went on for a long time, and ended with the near extermination of the MEPs by the Cherokee Nation, and presumably any of their allied tribes. I mentioned before that the MEPs are the source of no small amount of controversy. First off, few people can even agree on just who the MEPs might have been. Were they early European settlers? Some people theorize that they were early Welsh settlers to the region. Were they some ancient branch family of the human species that had gone along a slightly different evolutionary path? Or were they something more extraterrestrial? And sadly, the answer to these questions are beyond people much smarter than I, Tom the writer. Thank you for clarifying. And so I really can't do much but speculate, just as so many before me have. Let's start with possibly the most fantastical theory here, extraterrestrial. I just felt that audience pullback, and this hasn't even gone live yet. But now, hear me out here. In a universe that, while not infinite, is unfathomably large beyond our human ability to process, it would certainly be possible that these Moon-Eyed people came from somewhere among the stars. However, while I may like to think that this is possible, I have to say it would be the least likely. Occam's razor and all that. The next hypothetical origin of the MEPs that would probably border on the fantastical would be the divergent evolution theory. This idea that while humans and MEPs share a common ancestor, somewhere along the way before the MEPs branched off in the evolutionary sense. Now, I think, based on the legends of Bigfoot and other hominid-type creatures, or the old, quote, missing link theory, that the notion of this being a credible theory is quite high. In the case of Bigfoot-type creatures, we were the offshoot or branch-off species. But in the case of MEPs, perhaps they were an offshoot of ourselves. Not something I can say with great certainty, but a fun notion to entertain nonetheless. What some would consider the most likely, most credible theory would be that the Moon-Eyed people were very early European settlers, Welsh being the most often put forth. This theory, while possibly far less interesting, is the simplest and probably the one that holds the most water, especially when we take a step back and look at civilizations that have been found to have traveled more widely earlier on than we at one point thought possible. I'll even go so far here as to lay out a possible scenario to support the Welsh settler theory. The Phoenicians were the earliest pioneers when it came to sailing, shipbuilding, and navigation by the stars, and from their power base in modern-day Lebanon, sailed the entire length of the Mediterranean, setting up little outposts along the way, and establishing some of the earliest long-distance trade we have proof of. These pioneering peoples eventually crossed beyond the Pillar of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, and into the Atlantic Ocean, and made landing on the southern tip of Great Britain long, long before the Romans even thought about trying to conquer the known world. So now we have Phoenicians, advanced traders and shipwrights, present on the Isle of Great Britain, and the longer they stayed and the more they interacted with the indigenous people of the island, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that a brave, enterprising group of Welsh wouldn't purchase a Phoenician ship, or perhaps build one of their own based on the Phoenician design, and then set sail across the Atlantic, seeking what might lay beyond that horizon. Now, can I prove anything beyond that the Phoenicians were the premier shipbuilders of the ancient world, and that they had a presence in Britain before any other empire? Absolutely not. But it's just one of those things that the possibility is just too fun to entertain. Ancient explorers with nothing but a ship, a dream, and a passion to discover the distant corners of our planet is just too great a theory to not want to buy into. This is my first post here. I live in southern Ohio, Appalachian Valley area, and this happened this year, 2025. I was at work as a cashier at a truck stop. We have tons of people coming in and out all the time, and from my register I can see both doors of entrance to the building, and part of my job is to take mental note of who comes in and when they leave, and how long they've been there, etc. Two guys come in, one is a regular and the other is a random trucker. These were the only two customers in the store until they checked out. Well, they both checked out, and the second guy was getting his fuel, and when I turned back around to give him his ticket, there was what I thought was a very dark-skinned black man standing in line behind him. I took the man up to my register and he bought a fountain drink and tried to hand me a stack of Powerball tickets to play. I told him that, unfortunately, the machine was broken, and he stepped forward, seemingly to get taller than he was. He then growled and barked in my face. He jumped at me like a jack-in-the-box, and his body had a recoil that didn't match his skin and bone build. He stared me in the eye for a good 10 seconds before running out the door. I'm not sure that he was running, but he left too quickly to be walking, and the light started to flicker when he left. I was shocked. I couldn't understand why it terrified me so much until I looked back onto his face in my memory and out the window that he was staring through as he walked away. No, I did not want to know where he went. The only identifiable parts of his face were his yellow eyes with tiny black pupils and his stark white teeth. His tongue was black, and his breath smelled like death, like genuinely the smell of something dead. If you know, you know. And that's when I realized he never came into the store. He only left. Does anyone else have a similar experience? Hey, Raven. I've got a few stories to share and never really sent them in anywhere, but I saw your call out for topics and have one scary parents and childhood experience. Perfect. Growing up, I lived in a house for years where everyone thought it was haunted. My parents had a lot of issues and I could sense the energy. So I think that attracted things. Well, my mom had no interest in it until my dad went homicidal on my family and wanted to, quote, unalive everyone. Then we moved to North Carolina. I was doing readings, and so my mom got into voodoo. She showed me the dolls she made of my dad and his ex-wife, the black candles, and a couple of books. It's why I believe it exists. Because she would pluck my dad's hair, and then I saw a mugshot where he was balding fast. She threw the woman's doll down the stairs, and not long after, she fell and broke her knee and got addicted to pain medication. I'm also sharing this story in hopes that other people don't play around with that stuff. Anyway, I had a feeling that she was bringing something negative in, but one night it was not only confirmed, but why I believe in the paranormal. I had started seeing a woman with long hair in the window. Only a couple of times, but I convinced myself that I was crazy or tired for a while. The house was always cold and my mom's room would just randomly open all the time. Only her door. Well, this one night is why I'm convinced of spirits, no matter what other people say. I woke up to my legs literally being dragged down the bed at like 2 in the morning. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I watched my feet get pulled and saw nothing and nobody in front of me. It felt like arms yanked me down with my eyes wide open. After that, there was a night where the bed was shaking. It wasn't an earthquake, or for a few seconds. But I can't explain it because I've never seen it in another home or after that. I cleansed my room, the house, and haven't felt the same thing. I questioned whether spirits could really touch you or have strength, but I'm fully sure that I wasn't dreaming. My mom had a history of name-calling, choking, gaslighting often, and I still think that she accidentally invited something in. Any doubt about the paranormal was erased after being pulled across the room in the middle of the night.